The first thing Lin Hao noticed when he opened his eyes was the ceiling. It was a water-stained ceiling with a crack running diagonally from the light fixture to the window frame. The light fixture was old, a single bare bulb, not the smart LED panel that had been in his apartment. The window was rattling slightly in what sounded like wind. The bed beneath him was a firm, narrow single mattress that smelled faintly of medicinal herbs and old wood. The second thing he noticed was that his body hurt. Not the sharp pain of injury, but the deep, aching pain of a body that had been poorly maintained for years. His joints were stiff. His muscles had no tone. His chest felt hollow, like his lungs were 2 sizes too small. The third thing he noticed, and this was the thing that made him lie perfectly still for several very long minutes, was that he remembered 2 lifetimes. His own, Jiang Chen, 26 years old, web developer, amateur reader of cultivation fiction, dead on a Tuesday morning in Shanghai. And someone else's, Lin Hao, 17 years old, third-rate cousin of the Lin family's pride and joy, known throughout the Skyridge district of Nanjing City as the trash who can't cultivate, and destined, according to the novel Jiang Chen had been reading, to receive exactly 3 mentions in 847 chapters before vanishing entirely from the narrative. Oh no, Jiang Chen, Lin Hao thought. I'm in the novel. He sat up slowly, and the room confirmed it. The single window looked out onto the compound of the Lin family estate, a sprawling property in the northern hills of Nanjing that in this world doubled as the headquarters of Lin Cultivation Pharmaceuticals, one of the 30 largest cultivation-oriented corporations in the Yangtze River region. Beyond the tiled rooftops of the estate, he could see the shimmer of the city, modern skyscrapers glittering in the morning light, but threaded here and there with the distinctive blue-gold glow of spirit energy arrays mounted on buildings, the way old cities had once run power lines between poles. This was the world of Sovereign of 10,000 Paths, a world where, 26 years ago, the spirit veil, the invisible membrane that had separated the physical world from the primordial reservoir of qi, had thinned dramatically and then partially dissolved. Spirit energy had flooded into the world. Animals had begun manifesting cultivation instincts. Certain humans had discovered they could absorb and channel qi through meditation and martial practice. Within a decade, what had once been the domain of fantasy and mythology became the most important geopolitical reality on Earth. Cultivation academies had been built alongside universities. The government had established the Cultivation Management Bureau. Spirit beasts, animals that had absorbed enough ambient qi to gain intelligence, special abilities, and sometimes enormous physical power, now had legal status in 12 countries. Corporations that controlled cultivation techniques and spirit herb farms were worth more than some national economies. And somewhere in this sprawling, messy, spiritually awakened version of the modern world, a 17-year-old boy named Lin Feng was currently being hailed as the Lin family's greatest genius in 4 generations, a young man destined, according to the plot Jiang Chen had memorized across 847 chapters, to become the sovereign of the entire cultivation world. Lin Hao, Lin Feng's cousin, the family embarrassment, the boy who had tested at Qi Affinity Level 1 at his awakening ceremony, was not destined for any of that. He was destined to be humiliated at the family dinner in Chapter 12, to be mocked by Lin Feng's father in Chapter 34, and to disappear entirely from the story around Chapter 50, presumably to live out his days as what the narration had called a mundane, untalented bystander to greatness. Jiang Chen lay back on the mattress and stared at the cracked ceiling. Absolutely not, he said aloud, to no one in particular. A small sound responded. He turned his head. On the windowsill, a sparrow had landed without him noticing. It was an ordinary house sparrow, brown-feathered and round-eyed, tilting its head at him with the alert, jerky precision of its species. And then it spoke. Not in words, exactly. It was more like meaning arrived in his mind fully formed, the way you know something in a dream without being told, and yet it also had texture, a quality, a voice. The sparrow's voice was bright and quick, like water over stones. "You are awake," the sparrow said. "The sick-smelling boy is finally awake. You were making strange noises in your sleep for 3 days." Jiang Chen blinked. The sparrow tilted its head the other way. "Can you hear me?" The old crow said there would be a human who could hear. He said it would happen when the veil-touched boy came back to himself. "I can't hear you," Jiang Chen said slowly. His voice came out rougher than expected. The body had apparently been ill. What is the old crow?" "Old Black," the sparrow said. "He lives in the cedar tree by the south gate. He is very old and very rude, and he pretends not to care about anything, but he told all of us to watch this window. He said a listener would come." The sparrow ruffled its feathers proudly. "I was the one watching when you woke up. My name is Little Pip." Jiang Chen sat up again, more carefully this time. He pressed his fingers against his temples and tried to think through what was happening with the methodical part of his mind that had always been better at problem-solving than panic. He was in a novel. He was in the body of a side character. He could speak with animals. That last part was not in the novel. In Sovereign of 10,000 Paths, there was no mention of Lin Hao having any special ability. He was simply a background character, the cautionary tale the story needed to make Lin Feng's genius shine brighter by contrast. But here, now, a sparrow was chatting with him on his windowsill, and the communication was as clear as a phone call. "Little Pip," he said carefully, "has this always been possible? Can you always speak to humans?" "No," the sparrow said, with a contemptuous chirp that somehow conveyed a full opinion. "Humans are usually deaf as stones. Some of the big beasts, the tigers in the Western Preserve, the eagles at Heavenreach Academy, they've learned to project their chi into speech that cultivators can hear. But that's not the same as what you can do. You can hear the small voices. Even mine." A pause. "I am very important, but I am also small. I can hear that you're important," Jiang Chen agreed, which made the sparrow puff up visibly. He spent the next hour conducting what he privately called a diagnostic. His new body, weak, malnourished, with chi affinity at the absolute minimum, level 1 on a scale that went to 10. According to the novel, level 1 meant his meridians were barely capable of absorbing environmental spirit energy. He would never reach foundation building through conventional means. He would certainly never reach core formation, which was where the real power began. His chances of becoming a significant cultivator were, by the standards of this world, approximately 0. But he had something none of the novel's characters had mentioned. He could talk to animals. Every single one, apparently. And animals, in this world, were everywhere. In the city, in the cultivation academies, in the wilderness areas that had been set aside as spirit beast preserves. They saw things humans didn't see. They went places humans couldn't go. They heard conversations held behind closed doors. Jiang Chen looked at the sparrow on his windowsill and felt something stir in his chest. Not excitement exactly. Something more careful than that. Something that felt, in the language of a man who had spent his adult life thinking about systems and problems, like the beginning of a plan. "Little Pip," he said, "can you take me to Old Black?" Chapter 2. The Crow's Council. Old Black was, as advertised, very old and very rude. He was a large carrion crow, his plumage so dark it seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, perched on the highest branch of the ancient cedar by the south gate of the Lin estate. He had one eye that was a deep, intelligent black, and one eye that was filmed with gray, old injury, old age, or perhaps simply the weight of whatever wisdom crows accumulate across long, watching lives. When Jiang Chen approached the cedar, still moving stiffly in his unfamiliar body, Old Black looked down at him with the unique disdain that seemed to be a universal crow trait. "You took your time," Old Black said. His voice in Jiang Chen's mind was nothing like the sparrow's. It was deep, slow, and textured like old wood. "I told the small ones to watch your window 3 weeks ago. I was unconscious," Jiang Chen said. He had checked the body's memories and found that Lin Hao had fallen ill after an incident in the training yard. A cultivation exercise gone wrong, his body rejecting the technique that even the family's most mediocre disciples could perform. He had lain in fever for 11 days before finally breaking through it this morning. And I'm a different person than the boy who was in this body before. Old Black was quiet for a moment. Then yes, I could smell it. The soul smell changed. Lighter now. Less fear. He ruffled his feathers in what might have been approval. The old Lin Hao smelled always of fear. Fear smell is unpleasant. Prey smell. What happened to him? The original Lin Hao. Gone. Old Black said simply. Where souls go when the shell breaks. The fever was too much. You came in when he left. This is not unusual. Crows see it sometimes, when the veil is thin enough. A pause. The old birds filmed eye-catching the morning light. The question is what you will do with the shell he left behind. I want to cultivate, Jiang Chen said. But the body has almost no chi affinity. I need to know if there's a way around that. Old Black made a sound that was, unmistakably, a laugh. Not a kind one, but not a cruel one either. The laughter of someone who finds the question amusing because the answer is more complicated and more interesting than the asker suspects. Sit down, he said. This will take time. Jiang Chen sat on the roots of the cedar and listened, and what Old Black told him over the next hour fundamentally changed how he understood the cultivation world he'd fallen into. The world of Sovereign of 10,000 Paths, as Jiang Chen had understood it from the novel, was built around a single paradigm, human cultivation, which involved absorbing environmental qi through the meridians, refining it in the dantian, and using it to enhance the body, master techniques, and achieve ever higher stages of power. The stages: qi gathering, foundation building, core formation, spirit realm, Tao realm, where the latter everyone climbed. But that was the human perspective. The crows, it turned out, had been cultivating since long before humans had figured out how, and they saw the system differently. There are 3 rivers of cultivation, Old Black said. Humans know one. The one that flows through the human dantian and human meridians. They call it qi cultivation. He cocked his head. The second river flows through living creatures. All living creatures, not only humans. It is what makes my feathers sharp and my memory long and my eyes able to see qi light that human cultivators go blind searching for. Beast cultivation. Humans used to understand this too, long ago, before they decided they were the center of all things. And the third is the hardest to explain. Old Black was quiet for a moment, looking out over the estate with his one good eye. It flows through connection, through the bonds between living things. Humans have a word for it, resonance. But they only know it in pieces. Beast tamers who bond with their partners, cultivation partners who synchronize their qi, bonded warriors who fight in perfect coordination. The old crow looked down at him. What you can do, hearing the small voices, understanding the beasts, that is the third river made manifest. You are a resonance cultivator, one of the old kind. Jiang Chen was quiet for a moment. In all 847 chapters of the novel he'd read, he had never seen that term used. Is that good? It is not good or bad, Old Black said. It is rare, very rare. The last human who heard the small voices lived 400 years ago, according to what the old eagles say. The path is harder than human cultivation. You cannot simply absorb qi and refine it in a dantian. Resonance cultivation grows from relationships, from understanding. The more deeply you know a living being, the more qi flows between you. A pause. But the ceiling, the crow tilted his head, and in that gesture Jiang Chen read something that might have been reverence. The ceiling is higher than anything a human cultivator can reach alone. Jiang Chen absorbed this. Then he said, "Will you help me?" Old Black looked at him for a long time with his one clear eye. "I have been watching this family for 40 years, the crow said at last. I watched the old patriarch cultivate his way to spirit realm. I watched his sons fight over the inheritance. I watched Lin Feng be born and show his talent at 3 years old, and watched this family fold itself around him like a flower around a single bee. The old bird's voice was not bitter, exactly. It was something older than bitterness. Observation, maybe. I have watched the boy who was in your body before you get knocked down and ignored and forgotten. And I have thought, what a waste. What a terrible waste of a vessel that could hold something remarkable. He spread his wings slightly, then folded them again. Yes, Old Black said. I will help you. The other small ones will help you too, whether they know it or not. They already like you, and beasts do not like easily. A beat. But you must promise me something. What? When you are powerful, Old Black said, do not forget us. Humans always forget. Jiang Chen looked up at the old crow in the cedar tree and felt the weight of that request, not the demand of a creature seeking power or advantage, but the quiet ask of someone who had watched humans rise and always leave the small things behind. I promise, he said, and he meant it. Chapter 3. The Estate and its Inhabitants. Over the following week, while he was still technically recovering from his illness, and thus excused from the family's daily training schedule, Jiang Chen used his time the way any sensible person with a superpower would. He gathered intelligence. The Lin family estate was home to approximately 230 humans. It was also, he discovered, home to several thousand non-human residents that the humans either didn't notice or actively dismissed. There were the sparrows, Little Pip's extended family, which numbered around 80 birds and collectively knew the location of every secret the estate contained, because sparrows go everywhere and no one looks at them. There was a family of raccoon dogs living under the West Storage House, who had been there for 6 generations and knew the estate's underground drainage system better than the maintenance staff. There were 17 cats of various degrees of wildness who had free run of the entire property and whose gossip network was, Jiang Chen quickly discovered, genuinely extraordinary. The cats were particularly useful. The lead cat, a large, scarred Tom named, by himself, Iron Whiskers, was something of a neighborhood intelligence broker. He had an arrangement with cats from 3 neighboring properties, and through this network, information flowed freely about the affairs of the humans who thought they were living private lives. You're telling me, Jiang Chen said on the 3rd evening of his intelligence gathering, sitting cross-legged in the garden while Iron Whiskers sat across from him with the dignity of a small emperor, that Lin Feng's father has been secretly meeting with someone from the Zhao clan. 3 times in the last month, Iron Whiskers confirmed. His voice in Jiang Chen's mind was low and precise, with a particular crispness to it that reminded Jiang Chen of a very efficient middle manager. Always at the tea house on Lingxi Road. Always in the private room at the back. My contacts person, the Zhao family's head chef, goes to that same tea house and has spoken of overhearing cultivation technique names he did not recognize. Any idea what techniques? I am a cat, Iron Whiskers said, with absolutely no shame. I don't know cultivation techniques. I know body language, emotional states, and the smell of fear, ambition, and fish. For the content of their conversations, you would need a different source. He flicked his tail. But I can tell you that the last time they met, Lin Feng's father came home agitated. He went directly to the secure archive room, which he has not visited in 8 months. Jiang Chen filed this away. In the novel, there was a subplot around chapter 200 involving the Zhao clan and the Lin family, something to do with a secret technique that Lin Feng eventually acquired. He hadn't read far enough to know the details, but now he at least knew it was already in motion. More immediately useful was what Little Pip told him about the estate's spirit herb garden. The Lin family maintained a private cultivation resource garden behind the main house, a carefully tended patch of medicinal herbs and low-grade spirit plants that family members could use. Access was restricted by cultivation level. Only disciples who had passed Qi gathering stage 3 could enter. Lin Hao, with his stage 1 assessment, was explicitly banned. But There is a section at the back of the garden, little Pip chirped, perching on his knee with the casual familiarity she'd adopted since he'd begun supplementing her diet with premium bird seeds purchased via his phone. Behind the old water feature that stopped working. The gardener does not go there because there are bees. Bees? Jiang Chen looked up. Are the bees okay? The bees are excellent, little Pip said. Very serious. They guard something. A plant that grows from a crack in the old stone wall. It has been there for 11 years, I think. The old swallow who nested nearby before she died told me about it. She said it glowed at night. A spirit herb, hidden in the garden, protected by 11 years of bee guardianship, unknown to the family because nobody went near the bees. Jiang Chen went to speak to the bees. The hive queen, whose name translated roughly to "she maintains the warmth," was, of the creatures he'd met so far, the most alien in her mode of communication. Bee consciousness came to him in patterns and feelings and spatial memory rather than words, but the meaning was clear enough once he learned to interpret it. Yes, there was a plant. Yes, it was precious. Yes, they were guarding it. No, they would not sting him. They indicated with a kind of warm, buzzing agreement that resonated in his chest like a low harmonic, correct smelling. The right kind of human. The plant turned out to be a 7-leaf restoration root, a low-tier spirit herb that in the cultivation pharmaceutical market was worth roughly 20,000 yuan. More importantly for his purposes, it was a meridian-clearing variant. When processed correctly, it could temporarily enhance qi conductivity in the meridians. For a body with low qi affinity, consistently using such herbs over time could, over months, gradually expand the meridian's natural capacity. It wouldn't get him to level 10 affinity. Nothing would. But it could, Old Black had suggested, be combined with the early stages of resonance cultivation to create a compound effect. The expanded meridians conducting the resonance qi more efficiently, the resonance cultivation gradually opening his sensitivity further. It was slow. It was difficult. It required patience that 26-year-old Jiang Chen had and 17-year-old Lin Hao had never been allowed to develop. But it was a path, hidden in the crack of an old garden wall, guarded by bees, overlooked by everyone who had written him off. He began that night. Chapter 4. First Steps on the Path. Resonance cultivation, as Old Black explained it over the following weeks, did not begin with breathing exercises or meridian visualization or any of the structured techniques that human cultivation manuals prescribed. It began with listening. You already hear, Old Black said, but hearing and listening are different. A cat hears everything. A crow listens. Do you understand the distinction? Jiang Chen thought about it. He was sitting at the base of the cedar tree in the early morning, which had become his daily habit. The estate was quiet at this hour, only the birds awake and the raccoon dogs coming in from their night wanderings. Hearing is passive, he said. Listening is attention. Intention. Close enough. Old Black ruffled his feathers. Resonance cultivation begins when you truly attend to another living creature. Not just receive their communication. Attend. Feel the quality of their life energy. The rhythm of it. The shape. He paused. When you do this long enough and deeply enough, a thread forms between you. A genuine thread, not a technique or an artifact. A real connection of qi. And through that thread, energy flows. In both directions. It sounds like it could drain the animals. It gives as much as it takes, Old Black said. That is the nature of true resonance. A one-sided drain is not resonance. It is parasitism. Parasitism you can do with a technique. What I am describing is something else. Over the following weeks, Jiang Chen practiced. He would sit with little Pip, attending, really attending, in the full meditative sense, to the quality of her presence. Her small heartbeat. The way her qi moved, rapid and bright and bird-like. The connections she maintained with her family. Gradually, he began to feel what Old Black described. Not just the communication, but the actual qi thread, thin as silk but real, forming between them. The day he first felt chi move through that thread, a trickle, barely anything, flowing from the ambient world through little Pip's bright presence and into his own meridians. He sat very still for a long time afterward, feeling something that wasn't exactly joy but was adjacent to it. The feeling of a door opening. Meanwhile, he was also constructing a life. The body's memories gave him everything he needed to navigate the family's social landscape. He knew who to avoid: Lin Feng's father, Uncle Lin Guangxing, who was openly contemptuous of him. He knew who was merely indifferent. He knew the one person who had ever been consistently kind, an older female cousin, Lin Yu, who was 22 and worked in the family's pharmaceutical research division. She had occasionally brought Lin Hao food when he was ill and had never participated in the mockery. He cultivated at night and in early mornings. During the day, he read. The family's library had basic cultivation texts, and while they were written for human chi cultivation, understanding the theory of the system helped him map his own path. He also began managing the family connections he had, carefully. He repaired a small slight between Lin Yu and another researcher by knowing, through the cats, that the slight had been accidental. Information he couldn't have had as the original Lin Hao, but which he framed as, "I happened to overhear." He was building a reputation for being quiet, observant, and occasionally useful. Not the dramatic reversal that the novels loved, no sudden display of overwhelming power, no humiliation of his enemies in a public arena. Just the steady, careful accumulation of position, the kind of thing that took time. He had 6 months before the Heavenreach Cultivation Academy's entrance exam. The school that, in the novel, was where Lin Feng's story truly began. He intended to be there, and he intended not to be a footnote. Chapter 5. What the Crows Know. At the end of his second month at the estate, Old Black called what Jiang Chen privately thought of as a council. It happened in the cedar tree at sunset, and the attendees were not what he expected. Old Black had invited his 2 adult children, a pair of crows named, in the translation Jiang Chen's mind provided, Ink and Ash. He had invited the matriarch of the sparrow flock, a bird so old her brown was fading to gray. He had invited the lead cat Iron Whiskers, who sat on the garden wall with elaborate dignity. And most surprisingly, he had invited a bird Jiang Chen hadn't seen before, a large, dark gray dove, sitting on the wall beside the garden gate with an air of careful stillness. "This is Gray Voice," Old Black said. "She carries messages between the birds of this district. She knows things that come from outside these walls." "Hello," Jiang Chen said to the dove. "Hello, listener," Gray Voice said. Her communication voice was smooth and unhurried, with a melancholy undertone that seemed structural rather than situational, simply the quality of doveness. "Old Black has spoken of you. He says you are the first true listener in 400 years. So I'm told. What brings you here tonight?" "There is news from the wider world," Gray Voice said. "2 pieces of news that concern you. The first, Heavenreach Cultivation Academy had announced that year's entrance examination format. It would include, for the first time, a harmony assessment, a newly introduced evaluation of a cultivator's ability to resonate with spirit beasts. The Academy had acquired 12 young spirit beast assessment partners for this purpose. Most cultivators, even talented ones, scored low on this assessment. It was experimental, and the Academy wasn't yet sure how to weight it against the traditional Chi assessment. The second, a new student had registered at Heavenreach. His name was Lin Feng. Of course it was. He tested at Chi Affinity Level 9, Gray Voice said. The Ravens at the Academy say the examination hall has not seen a score that high in 30 years. The entire administration is celebrating. Jiang Chen absorbed this without visible reaction. In the novel, Lin Feng's entrance to Heavenreach was the inciting event of the story's main arc, the moment the boy genius stepped into the arena where legends were made. Of course it was happening. "What about the harmony assessment?" he asked. None of the other registered students scored above a 3 on the preliminary evaluation, Gray Voice said. Most did not understand what was being evaluated. Jiang Chen was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at Old Black. Do you know the spirit beasts the Academy uses for the assessment? Old Black made the low sound that was his version of a smile. I know the eagle who tutors the young ones, he said. Her name is Great Wind. She is old and difficult and judges humans very harshly. A pause. She would be worth speaking to. Can you arrange an introduction? I can send a message through the dove lines, Old Black said. Whether she agrees to meet you is her choice. He fixed Jiang Chen with his one clear eye. But she will come, I think. She has also been waiting for a listener. That night, lying on his narrow mattress with the estate quiet around him and the thread of connection to little Pip humming gently in his chi field, he was now maintaining stable threads to 7 animals, and the cumulative flow of resonance chi had noticeably expanded his meridians over the past 2 months. Jiang Chen thought about what he was building. It was not what the novel's heroes built. There were no lightning strike insights, no ancestral bloodlines awakening, no heaven-defying techniques acquired from deceased sect masters in convenient ruins. It was a web, a slow, careful, living web of relationships. A sparrow who watched his window, a crow who had waited 40 years for someone to listen, a dove who carried messages between the green spaces of a modern city, cats who knew every secret in a 3-block radius, and eventually, an eagle. He fell asleep thinking about the entrance examination and dreamed, for the first time in his new life, of flying. Part 2. Heaven Reach Academy. Chapter 6. The Entrance Examination. The Heaven Reach Cultivation Academy occupied the entire eastern slope of Zijin Mountain, outside Nanjing proper. In the old world, the world before the spirit veil thinned, it had been a scenic area popular with hikers and tourists. Now it was a campus that drew students from across eastern China, a collection of elegant stone buildings, training grounds, cultivation chambers, beast partner facilities, and research halls, all threaded through with spirit energy arrays that kept the ambient chi concentration significantly higher than the surrounding city. On the day of the entrance examination, Jiang Chen arrived early. He arrived early because Iron Whiskers had told him, 3 days prior, that the testing grounds had a small crow family nesting in the eaves of the main examination hall, and that these crows, cousins of Old Black's line, as it turned out, had been watching examinations for years. They knew the testing procedures in detail. They knew which examiners were strict and which were lenient. They knew, most usefully, that the spirit beasts used in the harmony assessment were kept in a facility on the north side of the examination compound and were allowed to roam the assessment garden between 7 and 9 a.m. before the examination began. He arrived at 6:45. The garden was a long rectangular space with cultivated grass, a small stream, and several large stones that the beasts used for resting. On the morning of the exam, it held 4 animals, a young tiger cub, about 6 months old and already showing the blue-striped fur that marked a spirit stage beast, a large amber-eyed eagle perched on the highest stone, a small fox with silver-tipped fur coiled near the stream, and a tortoise of considerable age moving with profound deliberateness along the garden's far wall. Jiang Chen sat on a bench at the garden's edge, in the morning quiet, and waited. It was the eagle who noticed him first. She was not Great Wind. That meeting had happened 2 weeks prior, and had been an experience he would not soon forget. This eagle was younger, female, with the particular bright dark eyes of a creature that had just begun to understand its own intelligence. Human, she said, her chi communication still rough-edged with youth. You sit very still for a human. I'm trying not to startle anyone, Jiang Chen said quietly. The eagle tilted her head. You speak. Small speech. She meant his communication channel, the one that reached small animals, not just the large projected chi speech of mature spirit beasts. Only big beasts speak to humans. How do you speak small? It's something I was born with, he said. My name is Lin Hao. What's yours? A pause. Then, Swift Talon said with the slightly uncertain pride of a young creature who has recently named herself and is not entirely sure the name fits yet. I am the youngest in the assessment cohort. I am not supposed to talk to the examinees before the test. I understand. I'll just sit here. He turned his gaze to the stream, giving the eagle the social space she probably needed. But after a moment, is the tortoise very old? Ancient shell? The eagle's tone shifted to something like respect. He has been at the academy for 60 years. He was here before most of the buildings. He must know a lot. He knows everything, Swift Talon said. He is very slow, but very smart. The students ignore him because he does not look impressive. A beat. This is foolish of the students. Jiang Chen looked at the tortoise at the far end of the garden and thought that he would very much like to have a conversation with Ancient Shell at some point. When the examination hall opened at 9 o'clock, 212 students filed in. Jiang Chen filed in with them. He wore the Lin family's student uniform, clean, pressed, nothing that marked him as particularly significant. He had no cultivation accessories, no spirit beast partner, no visible indication of any ability worth noting. The Qi assessment came first. Students were called one by one to place their hands on the Qi stone, a large crystal matrix that measured meridian capacity and ambient Qi absorption. The assessment ran highest to lowest, beginning with the school's pre-identified top candidates. Lin Feng's name was called third. The boy was, Jiang Chen had to admit, exactly as described in the novel, tall for his age, with the kind of effortless physical confidence that came from a body that had been cultivating at a high level since early childhood. He had the Lin family's strong features and his mother's dark, expressive eyes. He walked to the Qi stone with the unhurried ease of someone who already knew what the result would be. The stone flared golden. Level 9 Qi Affinity, confirmed. The hall murmured. Someone in the back actually cheered, which prompted a disapproving look from one of the examiners. Lin Feng stepped back, caught sight of Jiang Chen in the crowd with a flicker of something, recognition, surprise, and then a carefully arranged expression of polite neutrality, and returned to his seat. They had not spoken at the estate. Lin Feng had been away at a private training camp for most of the past 3 months. But the family dynamics were what they were. The brilliant cousin and the trash cousin occupied different planets in the Lin family's emotional solar system. When Jiang Chen's name was called, near the end of the list, because the registrar had assigned numbers based on predicted performance, and Lin Hao's predicted performance was at absolute floor. The hall had already settled into the particular boredom that came after the exciting results had been announced. He placed his hand on the Qi stone. Level 2. He had been level 1 at his previous assessment, 3 years ago. The 3 months of resonance cultivation and the 7-leaf restoration route had raised him by 1 full level. In absolute terms, this was still the lowest score among the current examinees by 4 points. The hall barely registered it. But level 2 was enough to pass the minimum threshold for academy admission. He had checked. He returned to his seat. The Qi assessment was over. Most of the low scorers who had come hoping to squeak in on talent were trying to calculate whether their level 3 or level 4 scores would be enough to secure a place. None of them were thinking about the harmony assessment. The harmony assessment took place in the garden. Students were sent in groups of 10, led to the garden where the 4 spirit beast assessors waited, and given 10 minutes to interact naturally. No techniques, no tools, no spirit beast contracts. Just the student and the animals, assessed on the quality and depth of the resonance field that formed between them. Most students went through the process with visible anxiety. The tiger cub was imposing. The eagle was unreadable. The fox was aloof. The tortoise was slow. The best results in the first few groups produced harmony scores in the low 3s, workable, but not remarkable. Lin Feng's group went in 4th. He scored a 6 on the harmony assessment, impressive for a human without beast tamer training. His Chi affinity of 9 created such a powerful ambient Chi field that even animals who weren't particularly interested in human interaction were drawn to investigate. Swift Talon landed on the stone nearest him and stared at him for a full minute, which the examiner scored as a significant interaction. Jiang Chen's group went in last. He walked into the garden and did not rush to the animals. He stood in the middle of the garden and simply settled. 3 months of daily practice. 3 months of learning what it meant to genuinely attend to living beings, to offer himself as a presence rather than a seeker. He breathed, and he opened. Ancient Shell, at the far end of the garden, turned his ancient head very, very slowly. "You," the tortoise said. His communication voice was unlike anything Jiang Chen had encountered yet. It was like hearing the inside of a river rock, if rocks had thoughts. Deep, patient, absolutely unhurried. "You are the listener." "Yes," Jiang Chen said. He walked toward the tortoise, and his walk was unhurried too. "I have been waiting," Ancient Shell said. "I do not wait for most things. Most things are not worth the time." A pause that lasted a full 30 seconds and contained what felt like a small geological epic. "Sit beside me." Jiang Chen sat beside the tortoise. The 10-minute timer was running. He could feel, at the edges of his awareness, the other animals reorienting. Swift Talon's head turning sharply, the silver fox lifting her nose, the tiger cub pausing its pacing. "There is a cultivation method," Ancient Shell said slowly, "that I have been carrying for 30 years. The examiner who brought me here gave it to me for safekeeping. He said, when the right student comes, give this to them." He thought it would be a human Chi cultivator, some powerful genius who could decode the technique from memory alone. But he was wrong about what right meant. The tortoise placed one ancient foot on the ground, and Jiang Chen felt a surge of something. Not Chi, exactly, but something adjacent to Chi, something older and deeper, flowing from the tortoise's body into the earth, and then up through Jiang Chen's point of contact with the ground. It was warm and complex and completely unlike anything a human cultivation technique had ever produced. It lasted 6 seconds, and in those 6 seconds, Jiang Chen absorbed not a technique, but a memory, the compressed understanding of a cultivation path that was not Chi cultivation and not beast cultivation and not quite what Old Black had described as resonance, but something that encompassed all three. A foundation, a framework that could hold everything he was building. When the 10 minutes ended and the examiner called time, Jiang Chen stood up slowly. He was shaking slightly, which he controlled. The examiner looked at his assessment card, blinked, looked again. "Lin Hao," she said, "your harmony score is..." She stopped. Then, visibly deciding to simply report what she saw. "Your harmony score is 9.7. The garden was quiet. Then Swift Talon, from her stone, made a sound that was unambiguously the eagle equivalent of shouting. An ancient shell very slowly closed his ancient eyes, and the silver fox sat up and looked at Jiang Chen with what he privately thought was the most intensely evaluating expression he had ever seen on any creature's face. Chapter 7. The Academy and its People. Heavenreach Cultivation Academy accepted students in 3 tiers: Excellence, Standard, and Provisional. Lin Feng was accepted at Excellence tier, the highest, with his Chi Affinity 9 and Harmony score 6 guaranteeing him the Academy's best resources, mentorship priority, and full scholarship. Lin Hao, Jiang Chen, was accepted at Excellence tier as well. This had not, based on the whispered conversations around him after the results were posted, been anyone's expectation. The Academy's admissions algorithm weighted Chi Affinity and Harmony score in a ratio that had been established when the Harmony assessment was introduced 3 years ago, and had never before produced a conflict between the two scores large enough to matter. A Level 2 Chi Affinity student had never received a Harmony score high enough to affect their tier. The algorithm, apparently unimpressed by precedent, had calculated that a Harmony score of 9.7 was exceptional enough to compensate for the Chi Affinity deficit and placed the student in excellence tier anyway. The academy administration was, according to the sparrows who lived in the administrative building's roof, having heated internal debates about this decision. Jiang Chen moved into the excellence dormitory block on a Tuesday, carrying a minimal amount of luggage and a small bag of premium bird seed in his coat pocket. Within 2 hours of arriving, he had introduced himself to the local bird population. The academy's campus was home to a complex and ancient animal community. The oldest residents, a pair of enormous barn owls who nested in the clock tower of the main administrative building, had been there since the building was constructed and regarded themselves, with some justification, as the senior intelligence service of the entire campus. Below them in the hierarchy were several crow families, a vast sparrow network similar to what he'd cultivated at the Lin estate, a population of red squirrels who lived in the campus's old-growth trees and had strong opinions about everything, and, most interestingly, a number of young spirit beasts who lived in the academy's dedicated beast habitat, a large enclosed natural area on the campus's east side. It was in the beast habitat that he made 3 significant connections in his first week. The first was with a young wolf. She was approximately 2 years old in spirit beast terms, which meant she had sufficient intelligence to hold complex thoughts, but was still young enough to be uncertain of herself. She had been brought to the academy as a donated research subject, which she resented, and she spent most of her time in the far northwest corner of the habitat, avoiding the other beasts and the students who came for observation exercises. Her name, in wolf terms, translated roughly to something between she who watches from high ground and shadow persistent. He called her Gray, with her permission. "You are the human who speaks to old ancient shell," she said, when he first approached her corner. She hadn't run. She'd watched him approach from 50 meters with the particular stillness of a wolf that has decided not to be threatened. "The birds talk about you. I hope they say good things." "They say you listen," she said. "That is enough." A pause. "I do not like humans. They look at me and see only what they can use." "I understand," he said. He sat down at the edge of her territory and did not advance further. "I'm not going to pretend I don't have interests, but I'd like to hear yours first, if you're willing." Gray was quiet for a long time. "Then, I want to go to the northwestern mountains. My pack is there. I was taken when I was young, and I want to go back." This was not a thing he could give her immediately. He said so, honestly, and she appreciated the honesty more than a false promise would have earned. But he told her he would work on it, and she believed him, and that was the beginning. The second connection was with a young red-tailed hawk named Dart, who lived in the western section of the habitat and was cheerful, brave, and absolutely fearless in a way that Jiang Chen immediately recognized as the hawk equivalent of overconfidence. Dart was delightful company and also an unparalleled aerial scout. His speed and sharp eyes made him able to cover the entire campus in minutes, and he had no social anxieties whatsoever about going wherever he wanted. The third connection was less expected. On his 4th evening on campus, walking back from the library, he heard a small and unhappy sound from behind the groundskeeping shed. It was a sound that was both very quiet and very distressed, the sound of a creature trying not to make sound and not quite succeeding. Behind the shed, curled against the foundation, was a small serpent, about 40 centimeters long, with iridescent scales that shifted between green and copper in the evening light. She had been injured. One of her scales near her midsection was torn, and the wound had the look of something that had been caught and then released. "Don't hurt me," she said immediately when he crouched beside her. Her communication voice was barely above a whisper, and her fear was palpable enough that he could feel it as a vibration in the resonance connection he maintained with the surrounding animals. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said. "You're injured. Can I look at it?" A very long pause. Then, with the trembling dignity of a small creature that was very frightened but also very determined, "Yes." Her name was Scale. The translation was more like she who reflects light, but she said Scale was acceptable. She was, he discovered over the following half hour while he cleaned her wound with a small first aid kit he'd begun carrying because the cats had told him the campus had a higher than average incidence of small animal injuries. A cultivated serpent, one of the rare wild spirit beasts that had independently begun developing intelligence without human cultivation assistance. She had found her way to the academy because spirit energy concentrations attracted developing spirit beasts, but she was small and not impressive and had been hassled by several students who thought she might be a useful familiar if subdued. She was not interested in being a familiar. "Nobody's going to subdue you," Jiang Chen said. He had finished with the wound and was sitting back on his heels. "This is your home if you want it." "I don't trust promises," Scale said. Her tiny tongue flickered. "That's fair," he said. "Watch. See if the promise holds." It held. Within a week, Scale was living under his dormitory room's radiator, which was warm and safe and had an excellent view of the door. She was also, as it turned out, extraordinarily observant. Serpents were capable of detecting vibrations through the floor with a sensitivity that no human cultivator could match, and Scale quickly became his early warning system for anyone approaching his room with less than friendly intent. She could also, with cultivation and effort, generate a small but surprising defensive chi pulse that had the quality of an electric shock. Not dangerous, but deeply unpleasant for anyone who tried to reach under the radiator without permission. By the end of his first week at the academy, Jiang Chen had a wolf in the northwest corner of the habitat who was carefully considering whether to trust him, a hawk who was delighted to run aerial reconnaissance whenever asked, a serpent under his radiator, access to the campus sparrow network, and ongoing communication with the barn owls and the clock tower, who had already provided him with 2 pieces of genuinely useful campus intelligence. He also had classes to attend. Chapter 8. 3 Women and a Difficult Question. The Excellence Tier cohort was 32 students. Lin Hao was at its center, as the highest-scoring student across all metrics, and the social gravity of this arrangement meant that the first week of classes was largely organized around him. Who sat near him? Who tried to speak to him first, who jostled for position in the invisible hierarchy that high-achieving young people construct in any competitive environment. Jiang Chen sat in the back row, which nobody wanted because the chi concentration was slightly lower there, and observed. The first person he noted was Zhao Shui. She was, in the novel, Lin Feng's primary female lead, cold, brilliant, the pride of the Zhao family, with an ice element cultivation affinity that was the rarest in the Yangtze region. In the novel, her arc with Lin Hao was long and complicated and involved 3 major misunderstandings, 2 near-death experiences, and a dramatic reconciliation at around chapter 600. In person, sitting 2 rows in front of him, she was exactly what the novel had suggested, composed, precise, and radiating the kind of focused intensity that made it very clear she was here to cultivate, not to socialize. Her uniform was perfectly pressed. Her hair was pinned with a single silver clip. When the instructor asked questions, her answers were exact and analytical. When Lin Hao said something clever, and he was clever, the novel hadn't exaggerated that. She responded with a micro-expression that was, if you were watching carefully, the facial equivalent of acceptable, but I could do better. The second person he noted was Yun Mei. She was not in the novel's main cast, at least not in the 847 chapters he'd read. She might have appeared later. She was small and bright-eyed, with a practical, unself-conscious manner and a backpack from which, at various points throughout the day, small sounds occasionally emerged. On the second day of classes, a small lizard climbed out of her collar during a particularly boring lecture on meridian theory, looked around with bright interest, and was hastily returned to the backpack with a whispered apology that was clearly half to the lizard and half to the students who had noticed. After class, Jiang Chen caught up with her in the hallway. "Your lizard is fine," he said. He was curious, not distressed. She blinked at him. "I'm sorry. The lizard who was in your collar." He wasn't uncomfortable. He just wanted to see what a meridian theory lecture looked like. Yunmei stared at him for a moment, then said, "How do you know he was curious and not distressed?" Most people assume every animal in an unusual situation is stressed. The quality of his movement, Jiang Chen said, which was mostly true. He hadn't used his ability on the lizard yet. The communication had come instinctively when they made brief eye contact in the hallway, and the lizard's chi presence had been bright and interested, not tense. He was looking around actively, not trying to get away. Distressed animals go inward. Curious ones go outward. Yunmei looked at him with a new kind of attention. "You're Lin Hao," she said. "The harmony score of 9.7. That's me." "I scored a 7.2, she said. "I've been studying beast taming for 3 years. My family are beast tamers going back 4 generations. She said this without resentment, just as fact. "How did you get 9.7? "I listen well," he said, which was also mostly true. A pause. Then Yunmei said, "My lizard's name is Copper. He has very specific opinions about temperature and will tell you about them at length if you let him." "I'll keep that in mind," Jiang Chen said. The third person he noted was Su Ling. She was in the Cultivation Pharmacy track, which shared some classes with the General Excellence curriculum. She was the quietest person in any room she occupied. Not shy, exactly, but self-contained in the way of people who are most alive inside their own heads. She had the particular focused absent-mindedness of a researcher, and twice in the first week she walked into walls because she was reading while walking. In the cafeteria on the 4th day, she was sitting alone with a thick text on spirit herb pharmacokinetics, eating an untouched bowl of rice while reading, when a sparrow landed on the table beside her tray, walked up to the rice, and began helping itself. Su Ling looked up from her book, looked at the sparrow, looked at her rice, looked back at her book, appeared to decide this was not the most unusual thing she'd encountered this week. Jiang Chen, 2 tables away, watched the sparrow, who was not little Pip, but one of the campus flock he was on good terms with, eat several beakfuls of rice, and then look in his direction with a satisfied expression. He caught Su Ling's eye. "I'm sorry about the bird," he said. "She's mine, or rather, I'm hers. I'll get you fresh rice." Su Ling looked at him, then at the sparrow, then back at him. "You have a sparrow that steals rice?" She has strong opinions about campus food quality. I think she's running a quality control survey. A beat. Then, unexpectedly, Su Ling laughed, a genuine, surprised sound, like someone who laughs rarely and is always slightly caught off guard when they do. "Sit down," she said. "She's welcome to the rice. I forgot to eat it anyway." These were the 3 women who, over the following months, would become the most significant presences in his life at Heavenreach Academy. They were not a harem in any dramatic sense. They were not competing for his attention, not organized around him as a central figure. They were 3 people who, through the particular alchemy of his ability and his attention, came to know him better than most people knew anyone, and found in that knowledge something they had not expected to find. But that took time. For now, they were simply the ice-type cultivator 2 rows in front of him, the beast tamer with the curious lizard, and the pharmacist who forgot to eat her rice. 3 entry points into a story that was supposed to have a different protagonist. Chapter 9. Cultivation at the Academy. Heavenreach Academy's cultivation curriculum for excellence tier students was intensive. Morning training from 6 to 8 a.m., core classes from 9 to noon, specialized track classes in the afternoon, then self-directed cultivation practice in the evenings. On weekends, there were group exercises, external training trips, and the optional, but strongly culturally encouraged, cultivation sparring matches that were how students established their informal ranking among peers. Jiang Chen's official cultivation standing was the worst in the cohort. Level 2 Qi Affinity meant he was classified as a Qi Gathering Stage 2 cultivator, and in the morning training sessions, this placed him in the developmental group, the small cluster of students who had the cultivation equivalent of low test scores and were given modified exercises that the instructors clearly regarded as better than nothing. He did these exercises diligently and drew no attention to himself. His actual cultivation, resonance cultivation, practiced in the pre-dawn hour before official training began, was progressing in ways that had no official measurement. The thread count was now 12 stable connections. Little Pip, the campus flock matriarch, 3 of the campus crows, Dart the hawk, Gray the wolf, Scale the serpent, Copper the lizard, which he'd begun maintaining at arm's length with Yunmei's knowledge but not full explanation, and 3 of the squirrels in the old-growth section. Ancient Shell at the academy. While not maintaining a permanent thread, the tortoise was too old and too large a presence to be in constant connection, had become a weekly touchpoint that consistently provided him with what he could only describe as calibration, like checking your compass against true north. The resonance chi flowing through his expanded meridians was now consistently greater than what his chi affinity level 2 could collect from the environment alone. He was not, by human cultivation metrics, advancing at any visible pace. But by Old Black's metrics, the old crow visited him monthly, flying the distance from the estate in what he described as a routine surveillance route. He was advancing rapidly. Your core is forming, Old Black said. In their 3rd-month meeting, standing on the windowsill of his dormitory room, while Scale watched from under the radiator with her unblinking serpent attention. Not a Dantian core. A resonance core. Different structure. More distributed. The old crow considered this. It will not look like anything a human cultivation exam can detect, but it will be real. How powerful will it be when it's complete? Power is the wrong frame, Old Black said. A resonance cultivator does not have power in the way a human cultivator does. One thing they can do with more or less force. They have depth, breadth. They have what every being in their network can do, multiplied by the depth of understanding between them. A pause. Your 12 threads, fully mature, will give you 12 different angles on the world. As you add more, as your understanding deepens, the geometry of what you can perceive and do becomes something no single cultivator, however strong, can match. That sounds like a very long-term advantage. All real advantages are long-term, Old Black said, with the authority of a crow who has watched human cultivation for 40 years. The humans who flash brightly and then burn out, they are everywhere. The ones who compound slowly and then cannot be stopped, they are rare. He tilted his head. Which do you want to be? The second one, Jiang Chen said. Then cultivate your network, Old Black said. Every thread is an investment. Every relationship is a compounding asset. He spread his wings. Also the wolf. Gray. She is close to trusting you. Go slowly. She will be worth it. He lifted off from the windowsill. I will come again in a month. Chapter 10. The First Test. 2 months into the semester, the academy held its first major assessment. The primary evaluation was a week-long examination that tested cultivation progress, technique proficiency, and for the first time in academy history, a new component, the Spirit Resonance Challenge, a practical test in which students interacted with a series of spirit beasts and were scored on the depth and quality of their communication and coordination. This was new. In the original novel, Jiang Chen didn't remember reading about a Spirit Resonance Challenge. It was possible this had been introduced after the point in the story where Lin Hao, the original, had disappeared. Or possibly the Academy had added it in response to his anomalous entrance score, which would be both flattering and slightly alarming. The cultivation progress assessment was, as expected, brutal for him. In 2 months at the Academy with intensive training resources, Excellence Tier students had averaged 1 full substage advance in their Qi gathering cultivation. The top students, Lin Feng included, had advanced 2 substages. Lin Hao, by official measurement, had advanced 0. His official cultivation level was exactly the same as when he had entered. The examiner noted this without expression and wrote something in the assessment form that Jiang Chen suspected was not complimentary. The technique proficiency assessment was more nuanced. The basic techniques taught in the first semester were general cultivation exercises, breath regulation, qi circulation patterns, basic defensive qi hardening. And while these were all explicitly designed for qi cultivation, Jiang Chen had been quietly adapting the circulation patterns to work with resonance qi. He had technique scores in the passing range, which combined with his harmony assessment entrance score placed him in a complex position numerically. The Spirit Resonance Challenge was held on the fourth day. The spirit beasts for this evaluation were different from the entrance assessment. The Academy had brought in 12 animals from various environments, 6 of which were mature enough to have developed complex intelligence. Examinees were given 30 minutes in a large open hall, with the animals free to roam, and were assessed on initiative, quality of interaction, depth of communication, and, most unusually for a Cultivation Academy evaluation, what the rubric called authenticity of connection. Jiang Chen walked into the hall and did not do what most of the other students had done. Immediately try to approach the most impressive animal or demonstrate knowledge by correctly identifying species and spirit stage, or use a beast taming technique. He walked to the center of the hall and sat down on the floor. And then he waited. For 30 seconds, nothing happened. He could feel the examination committee watching with the slightly confused attention of people who aren't sure if a student is being strategic or simply lost. He could feel the animal's awareness turning toward him, the particular quality of attention that beings give to an unexpected thing. The first animal to approach him was the tortoise. Not Ancient Shell. This was a younger tortoise, brought in from the Eastern Wetlands Nature Preserve, probably 40 years old and still in early spiritual development. She moved slowly across the hall and stopped 2 feet away from him. "You are strange," she said. Her communication was rougher than Ancient Shell's, the way a person learning to speak is rougher than a fluent speaker. "You sit. Most humans move. I find that waiting works better than moving," Jiang Chen said. "Yes," the tortoise said. After a moment, she continued moving and settled against his knee. That was the beginning. Over the following 25 minutes, 4 of the 12 animals came to him voluntarily, which in 30 years of assessment history had apparently never happened in combination with a student who had a Qi affinity below level 5. The mature hawk in the group landed on his shoulder and stayed for 12 minutes, which the committee observed with increasing agitation. A young otter pressed its wet nose to his hand and then sat on his foot. The silver fox from the entrance assessment, who had clearly remembered him, sat across from him and stared with the intense, evaluating gaze that he was beginning to understand was the fox's version of genuine interest. His Spirit Resonance Challenge score was 9.4. Lin Feng's was 7.8, which was the second highest in the cohort and would have been remarkable in any other context. After the results were posted, Lin Feng found him in the hallway outside the assessment hall. This was the first time they had spoken since the entrance ceremony. "Cousin," Lin Feng said. He said it carefully, with the particular weight of someone who is aware that the word carries complicated history. "Your spirit resonance score is impressive." "Thank you," Jiang Chen said. He kept his tone neutral and warm in the same measure. "The committee was talking about your entrance score before this." Lin Feng's dark eyes were direct and, Jiang Chen thought, genuinely curious rather than competitive. "I've been trying to understand. Your Qi affinity is level 2. Your harmony and resonance scores are the highest in the cohort. How does that work?" Jiang Chen considered the question. Then he said, "Some things are better measured by connection than by force." Lin Feng was quiet for a moment. Then, the original cultivation theory texts say that resonance was the first form of cultivation before humans developed the Dantian-based system. He said it like someone who has been doing independent research. The technique methods were lost. Most scholars think they can't be recovered. Most scholars might be wrong. Another silence. Then Lin Feng said, with what sounded like something between respect and the very particular discomfort of encountering someone who complicates your assumptions, I'd like to know more about how you think about cultivation, cousin. Then let's talk about it sometime, Jiang Chen said. And he meant it. Part 3. The Spirit Forest Trial. Chapter 11. Before the Forest. In the Academy's first-year curriculum, the semester's midpoint brought the Misty Spirit Forest Survival Trial. The Misty Spirit Forest occupied a 300-square-kilometer protected area in the mountains southwest of Nanjing. Spirit energy concentration in the forest was approximately 40 times higher than the surrounding city, which meant an unusual density of spirit plants, spirit beasts, and the occasional naturally forming chi vortex or spirit spring. The Academy's trial involved sending excellence tier students into the forest in small teams of 4, with limited supplies and equipment, to navigate to designated checkpoints over 72 hours. It was, by the Academy's own assessment literature, rigorous and character-forming. 3 students had been injured in the previous year's trial. One had been lost for a full day before being found by the rescue team. The team assignments were posted a week before the trial. Jiang Chen's team, himself, Lin Hao, Zhao Shui, and Yun Mei. He strongly suspected the Academy had engineered this team composition, putting the 2 top-scoring students, Lin Hao by Chi Affinity, himself by Resonance, on a team with the second-ranked general student, Zhao Shui, and the best beast-taming student in the cohort, Yun Mei, was either random chance or the particular kind of deliberate challenge that institutional pedagogy liked to call dynamic learning. He accepted it with equanimity. He had wanted to get to know Zhao Shui better, and the forest would provide extensive opportunity. The week before the trial, he visited Gray. The young wolf was in her usual corner of the habitat, but her posture when he arrived was different, less coiled, less defensive. She had been observing him for 3 months and had apparently come to conclusions. "The forest trial," she said, before he could speak. "You are going." "Yes." "Is it your territory?" "The Misty Spirit Forest." "No," Grace said. "My territory is north. But my kind know the forest. We have relatives there, the Iron Fang Pack. They know every path." She was quiet for a moment. "I will ask the crows to carry a message. To tell the Iron Fang Pack, there is a listener going into the forest, and he should be helped." Jiang Chen looked at her. Thank you, Gray. I don't take that lightly." "I know." She lay down, stretching out on her front legs in what, for a wolf, was a remarkably trusting posture. "Also, I have been thinking about what you said. About working on going home." "Have you?" He had. He'd spent time with the Academy's Beast Welfare Office, asking careful questions about the legal process for returning donated spirit beasts to natural habitats. There was a process, lengthy, bureaucratic, requiring proof of stable pack territory and healthy ecological conditions. He'd begun building a file. "It's in progress," he told her. 6 months to a year, probably. The paperwork is considerable. Humans make everything complicated, Grace said. But it was not said with hostility. Just observation. "We do," he agreed. "But we can also do paperwork, which turns out to be useful." The day before the trial, he also visited Ancient Shell, who was in the garden contemplating what appeared to be a particularly interesting patch of moss. "You are worried," Ancient Shell said, without looking up. "A little. 72 hours in a high-concentration spirit environment with 3 people who don't know the extent of my ability. A lot of things that could go wrong." "Things always could go wrong," the tortoise said. "The question is not whether they will go wrong, but whether you will be present enough to respond correctly when they do." A long pause, in which approximately 14 seconds passed, and several clouds shifted. "In the forest, there are presences older than this academy, older than this city. They do not automatically welcome humans." Another pause. "But they will know you. A listener who enters the forest will be known immediately by every creature in it. Conduct yourself accordingly." "How do I conduct myself accordingly?" "As you have been," Ancient Shell said. "With attention, with respect, without assumption." He moved his head, slowly, to look at Jiang Chen with one ancient eye. You are not the same person who would have walked into that forest as the original Lin Hao. You are becoming someone different. Let that person walk. Jiang Chen sat with this for a while. Around them, the garden held its morning quiet. A butterfly landed on the edge of the stream. A sparrow in the cedar called once, twice, and then was silent. I'm ready, he said. No one is ever ready, Ancient Shell said. But you are less unready than most. That is sufficient. Chapter 12. Into the Forest. The trial teams entered the misty spirit forest at dawn, through the southern access gate where the Academy's monitoring team had established a base camp. Each team was given a sealed envelope with their first checkpoint coordinates, a standard first aid kit, 3 days of minimal rations, and communication seals that could contact the monitoring team in genuine emergencies. The monitoring team had expressly stated that using the communication seal would result in a failed trial. The forest received them with fog. Misty Spirit Forest's name was literal. A layer of low spirit energy cloud hung between the trees at all times, thicker in the early morning, thinning to visibility by midday, but never fully clearing. Within an hour of entering, Jiang Chen understood why the trail had produced injuries and 1 full day of someone being lost. The paths that looked clear on the map were not always clear on the ground. The fog played tricks with distance and direction, and the spirit energy concentration affected the chi sense that experienced cultivators used to navigate, making it unreliable. He did not have this problem. 2 minutes after they crossed the tree line, a small bird, local species, brown and round, something between a wren and a warbler, landed on a branch near his head and delivered what amounted to a detailed current conditions report. The fog would thin in 2 hours. The eastern path was clear of the territorial chi vortex that moved through this area weekly. There were 3 iron fang wolves in the northern quadrant of their first-day territory, and one of them, hearing the crow message, had positioned itself near the path they were supposed to take to confirm they were going the right direction. He digested this in approximately 3 seconds, while Lin Feng was consulting the checkpoint map and Zhao Shui was assessing the fog's density with a careful chi sense probe. Eastern path, he said. Lin Feng looked up. The map suggests the northern path is more direct. The northern path has a chi vortex currently positioned in our travel corridor. The eastern path is clear and adds maybe 20 minutes. A silence. How do you know about the chi vortex? Zhao Shui asked. Her tone was not skeptical exactly. More careful. The way someone is when they're genuinely curious but don't want to be seen as credulous. The local birds, Jiang Chen said simply. They track the vortex because it disrupts their nesting sites. It's been moving east from its current position for 3 days, which means it's right on the northern path today. Another silence. Then Yun Mei said, he's right. Beast tamers learn to read animal behavior for environmental information. The birds in this area are all flying east-south. That's avoidance pattern for a chi disturbance in the north. Zhao Shui looked at Yun Mei, then at Jiang Chen. Her expression was the careful, assessing one she applied to things she wasn't sure about but took seriously. Eastern path, she said, as if she'd made the decision herself. Let's move. They made excellent time on the first day. Jiang Chen navigated with quiet confidence, using the information that arrived continuously, from local birds, from the forest's small mammals who crossed their path, from the distant communication of the iron fang wolf who was, as advertised, stationed at the junction points. A large gray shadow briefly visible and then gone, leaving only the sense impression of a path clearly marked. Lin Feng walked behind him, watching with the attention of someone who is recalibrating in real time. Yun Mei walked beside Jiang Chen and occasionally murmured questions about the animals they passed that he answered in the same low tone, and their conversation gradually became a running naturalist commentary that Zhao Shui, from her position in the lead, clearly found herself listening to despite herself. At the first checkpoint, they arrived 2 hours ahead of any other team. Chapter 13, What the Forest Knows. On the second night, everything changed. They had made camp near a clearing with a small spirit spring, a natural upwelling of chi-rich water that was excellent for cultivation practice and conveniently positioned near their second checkpoint. The camp was Zhao Shue's design, methodically laid out with a defensive chi perimeter, appropriate watches, and a fire built to minimize smoke. She was extremely competent, and she knew it, and she was efficient enough about it that the knowledge didn't become arrogance. Jiang Chen was on the second watch, midnight to 2 a.m., when the eagle found him. It was a different eagle from any he'd met, enormous, with a wingspan that blocked stars when it dropped from the canopy onto a branch 30 meters up. Old, scarred, with the communication quality of something that had been accumulating chi and intelligence for decades. Listener, it said. Elder Eagle, he responded. He had learned, in his months of communication with animals, that the quality of the address mattered as much to them as tone of voice mattered to humans. I am honored you came. We have heard you are here. The old crow's message came far, and we know the name he gave you. The listener returned. The eagle's presence was vast and unhurried, like a mountain that had decided to speak. Do you know why this forest is called Misty? The spirit energy cloud, he said. No, the spirit energy is a symptom. The cause is what lies beneath this mountain's eastern face. An old cultivation site. Ancient. Before the human cultivation schools, before the academies. A place where the resonance way was practiced, when it was still a known path. A pause that held the weight of very old things. The practitioners who built it are gone, for 100 years gone. But the site remains. It was sealed when the last listener died, keyed to open only for the next. Jiang Chen was very still. It is within your trial's boundary, the eagle continued. The academy does not know what it is, to non-resonance cultivators. It reads as a moderate chi concentration, nothing remarkable. They have built a monitoring station near it for decades without knowing what they sit beside. Another pause. You have until your trial ends. Whether you go is your choice. Why are you telling me this? Because we have also been waiting, the eagle said. The forest was told, tend it and wait. We have tended it. We have waited. 400 years is long, but we do not measure time as humans do. A beat, and then something that translated as a very deep, very old sigh. We are tired of waiting. He didn't tell the others immediately. He spent the rest of the watch thinking about it, feeling the weight of the information against the weight of his responsibilities, to his team, to the trial, to the promises he'd made about not vanishing into his own path and forgetting the people around him. In the morning, over the fire breakfast, he told them all. Lin Hao was immediately interested. Zhao Shui was immediately cautious. Yin Mei asked how the eagle knew. It's a keeper of the forest, Jiang Chen said. Old enough that it remembers when the site was still active. It told me that the site requires a resonance cultivator to access. Anyone else who's tried has apparently just found a pleasant meditation spot. So you're saying, Zhao Shui said, that somewhere in this forest there is an ancient resonance cultivation site, and the only person in our team who can access it is you, and the only reason we know about it is because an eagle told you at midnight. She said this with the precision of someone laying out the logical structure before deciding what to do with it. Yes, Jiang Chen said. A pause. How far out of our way is it? About 6 kilometers northeast. I think we can do all 3 checkpoints and still reach it before we have to return. Zhao Shui considered this for approximately 10 seconds with the expression she reserved for problems that had multiple non-obvious solutions. Then she said, show me the route. Chapter 14, The Hidden Site. The ancient cultivation site was everything the eagle had described and nothing like what Jiang Chen had imagined. He had expected something ancient in the way that movie ancient meant. Crumbling stone, dramatic ruins, the visual vocabulary of grandeur decayed. What he found, after navigating 3 kilometers of dense forest and 2 hours of careful pathfinding with the Iron Fang Wolf's distant guidance, was a small valley. The valley was circular, perhaps 200 meters across, with a floor of soft grass and a single large oak tree at its center. The oak was enormous. 4 people couldn't have reached around its trunk, and ancient in a way that was different from simply being old. Its bark had the faint internal glow of a tree that had absorbed so much ambient qi over centuries that it had developed its own rudimentary cultivation. Animals filled the valley, not gathered the way they might have gathered around food or water, gathered the way people gather around something important. Deer in the eastern corner, foxes near the western edge, a pair of eagles in the oak's upper branches, smaller birds in the grass, a family of badgers near the tree's roots. Wolves, iron fang wolves, ranged around the valley's perimeter like sentinels. "Welcome," they said, one after another as he entered, each in their own voice, their own idiom. "Listener, welcome." Lin Hao, Zhao Shui, and Yunmei entered the valley after him and went quiet in a particular way, the way people do when something they don't have words for enters their sensory field. The animals watched them without alarm or aggression. "They're not afraid of us," Yunmei said softly. "They were told we were coming," Jiang Chen said. He walked to the oak tree. The tree's root system was enormous, sprawling across half the valley floor in great curved arches before disappearing underground. Where the largest root met the trunk, there was a hollow, not a natural hollow, but one that had been carefully worked, smoothed inside to a specific shape. In its center, barely visible against the dark wood, was a faint pattern of lines that pulsed with a light too subtle to see in daylight, but visible now, in the forest's constant qi-touched mist. He placed his hand against the pattern and felt something old and enormous wake up. The knowledge that came to him was not like a memory download or a sudden flash of enlightenment. It was more like the first few pages of a very long book becoming clear when you'd previously been reading without light. The resonance weighs fundamentals, already partially understood from ancient Shell's gift and Old Black's teachings, suddenly had their theoretical architecture restored. He understood why it worked the way it did. He understood the relationship between connection depth and power generation. He understood the structure of a mature resonance core and how it differed from a dantian. He understood that the path had a ceiling that made human cultivation look like a tall building standing beside a mountain. He stood with his hand on the oak for several minutes, absorbing. When he stepped back, Zhao Shui was watching him with an expression that had gone past careful into something more complex. "What happened?" she asked. "I received a cultivation inheritance," he said. "Not technique cards or manuals. More like the theoretical framework of an entire path that's been missing for 400 years. He paused, trying to find words. "It's like the difference between knowing a road exists and having a map of the entire continent." "Are you okay?" Yunmei asked. She had moved beside him with the directness that characterized her, and she was looking at him with assessment rather than drama. "Yes," he said, and he was. Better than okay. The resonance core that had been slowly forming over months had, in the contact with the oak, snapped into clarity. Not complete, not powerful yet, but finally structured, finally real. Lin Hao had said nothing. Jiang Chen looked at him and found his cousin standing at the edge of the valley, hands at his sides, looking at the animals with an expression he hadn't seen on the other boy's face before. Not the easy confidence of a genius at the top of his field, but something stripped back and genuine. Something that looked, if he read it correctly, like someone encountering the edges of their own understanding. "The animals," Lin Hao said finally. "They're doing something. The qi in this valley, it's circulating in a pattern I've never seen. It's not the standard environmental flow. They maintain it," Jiang Chen said. "The valley. The cultivation environment. They've been doing it for 400 years. Lin Hao was quiet for a long moment. "I have read everything the Academy library has on cultivation theory," he said. "I never read about this." "Some things aren't in libraries," Jiang Chen said. "Sometimes they're in what the animals know." Something shifted in Lin Feng's expression. The particular shift of someone who is, for the first time, seriously reconsidering an assumption they didn't know they'd made. It was, Jiang Chen thought, the beginning of something worth watching. Chapter 15, The Wolf and the Ice. They made it back from the valley with 4 hours to spare before the trial's end. The return journey went wrong in the last hour. The chi vortex that had been on the northern path had, in the 3 days since they'd avoided it, migrated. It had moved to the southeastern quadrant, directly across the most efficient return route, and was currently in what the local birds described as an expansion phase, the random spiraling growth that vortices went through before they stabilized or dissipated. Walking through an expanding chi vortex at Zhao Shui's cultivation level was manageable. Walking through it at Jiang Chen's official cultivation level was not. He was told this, in rapid sequence, by 3 birds and a squirrel, while they were making good time toward the extraction point. He passed the information to the team without explaining exactly how he knew. Can we go around it? Lin Feng asked, consulting the map. We'd add 2 hours. We don't have 2 hours. Zhao Shui said, I can suppress it. She said it simply, matter-of-factly, the way she said everything that was accurate about her own capability. My ice-type chi is naturally suppressive to chaotic chi formations. I can create a passage through it that holds long enough for all of us to cross. At what cost to your cultivation base? Lin Feng asked. Acceptable, she said, which told Jiang Chen it was not trivial. There's a third option, Yin Mei said. She had been quiet, but she'd been watching the forest, and she pointed to the left, into the trees. The badger's territory runs through here. They have tunnels. The vortex is a surface phenomenon. It doesn't extend underground. A beat. Then Lin Feng. You want us to go through badger tunnels. Badgers in high chi environments have significantly expanded tunnel systems. Some of them are large enough for a person on hands and knees. She looked at Jiang Chen. Can you ask them? He had, in fact, already been having this conversation for the past 90 seconds. He turned to the forest. Third large route to the left of that split pine, he said. There's an entrance there. They say the main tunnel runs for 400 meters and comes out on the other side of the vortex zone. They'll guide us. Zhao Shui stared at him. They'll guide us, she repeated. They have someone who knows the route. He paused. She said she's happy to lead humans through if we don't touch anything. The badger who led them through the tunnels was named. In the translation his ability provided, she who expands the burrow. She was a large, serious female with strong opinions about proper tunnel etiquette, and she communicated these opinions in a continuous low stream of commentary that Jiang Chen had to work hard not to laugh at while crawling through 300 meters of earthen tunnel with his cultivation team. Don't touch the walls. The walls are damp, but they are my walls. Your large friend's shoulders are very wide. Tell him to angle. Lin Feng, angle your shoulders to the right. Why to the right? Burrow engineering reasons. They emerged on the other side of the vortex zone with 20 minutes to spare, covered in dirt, and successfully completed the trial. At the extraction point, they were the third team to arrive. Zhao Shui, sitting with her back against a tree waiting for the other teams, said without preamble, your ability to communicate with animals is not something that can be explained by good observation skills or behavioral interpretation. No, Jiang Chen said. It can't. You can actually speak with them, receive and transmit information. She was not asking. She was laying down what she had concluded. Yes. A pause. The animals we worked with this week trusted you immediately. Animals at that intelligence level, mature spirit beasts, cultivated creatures, don't give trust easily. Another pause, and then, from Zhao Shui, something that did not come easily. You kept us informed without making it about you. When you had information, you shared it in a way that let us make decisions. You didn't use it to establish superiority. A beat. I appreciate that. He looked at her. I appreciate your trust. He meant it simply. Zhao Shui looked away from him, into the forest, with the expression she wore when she was thinking about something she hadn't fully processed yet. The resonance cultivation path, she said. Do you think it could be recovered fully? Not just your personal ability, but the whole theoretical system. That's what I'm working on, he said. Another beat. Then, I'd be interested in the theory from a chi cultivation perspective. There might be intersection points. I'd like to explore that with you, he said. Yun Mei, who had been sitting nearby and pretending not to listen, caught his eye and gave him a small smile that was so precisely tuned to the subtext of the conversation that he realized she had, at some point in the past 72 hours, begun paying considerably more attention than he'd thought. Part 4. The Underground. Chapter 16. What the City Animals Know. When they returned to the academy, 3 things happened quickly. The first was that their trial results were posted. Their team had achieved the highest combined score in the trial's history. The spirit resonance components of the team scores, particularly Jiang Chen's individual ratings in the beast interaction segments, pulling the overall average to a level that normally required all 4 team members to be in the excellence tier's top quarter. The instructors had quietly fascinating conversations about this in the administrative wing, according to the Barn Owls. The second was that Lin Feng sought him out for a conversation that lasted 3 hours and covered cultivation theory, the philosophy of knowledge, and the question of whether there were other lost cultivation paths beyond the resonance way. It was the first genuine conversation they'd had, and it established something that the original novel had never mentioned: the possibility that Lin Feng and Lin Hao, if Lin Hao had been a real person rather than a narrative device, might have actually liked each other. The third was that Old Black arrived from the estate with urgent information. The crow landed on his window at 4 a.m., which was not his usual time. Listen, Old Black said. There is something happening in the city that requires your attention. The problem had been detected, first, by the Urban Crow Network. Crows in modern cities were, Jiang Chen had learned, the most sophisticated urban intelligence service in the animal world. They mapped human behavior patterns, recognized individual faces, communicated complex information, and maintained a citywide network of observation that no human surveillance system matched for granularity or persistence. The Nanjing Crow Network had noticed something over the past month, a pattern of spirit beast disappearances. Not dramatic, visible disappearances, not the kind that triggered formal investigation. Small beasts, mostly. Cultivated creatures at low spirit stages, from the margins of the urban ecology. The raccoon dogs, the city foxes, the intelligent crows and ravens at the lower end of the cultivation spectrum. They were disappearing at a rate slightly higher than the baseline of accidents and natural mortality, in a way that was hard to detect unless you were watching carefully across the whole city, which the Crow Network was. Where are they going? Jiang Chen asked. We tracked too, Old Black said. To a warehouse in the industrial district east of the old port. It is registered as a cultivation pharmaceutical supplier. The crows who went close enough to observe said they could smell many beasts inside. And cultivation suppression array signatures. Illegal spirit beast harvesting. In the modern cultivation world, it was a significant crime, classified as both animal cruelty and cultivation contraband production, since spirit beast byproducts were used in some high-grade pharmaceutical preparations. The legal industry operated through licensed beast relationship programs where cultivators voluntarily partnered with beasts. The illegal industry harvested them. Do the crows have address details? He asked. Everything, Old Black said, with a crow's unambiguous pride in the quality of their intelligence. Registration records, patrol schedules. Crows can read human writing, you know, when it is sufficiently large, and the comings and goings of vehicles. We have had 3 of our kind watching for a week. He spent the next 2 days thinking about what to do. The obvious move was to go to the Cultivation Management Bureau. He had the information, specific and credible. He could file a report. The problem with the obvious move: spirit beast harvesting operations rarely operated without protection from someone in the legitimate cultivation establishment. The Bureau had known informers in it. The Crow network had noticed bureau inspectors taking different routes than their official routes, meeting in places that weren't their offices, in patterns that suggested either corruption or a compromise of their communications. He didn't have enough information to know which. The second problem, he was a first-year academy student with an official cultivation level of Stage 2. Nobody was going to take him seriously unless he had evidence that was impossible to dismiss. So he needed to gather that evidence. Iron Whiskers, reached through a message relayed by Grave Voice the Dove, responded with enthusiasm. Cats have excellent infiltration capability, he said. Also, several of my cousins live in the warehouse district. They will help. Chapter 17. The Network Moves. Over the following 3 weeks, Jiang Chen ran what he privately described as an intelligence operation. He did not do it alone. Coordinating through the animals, with the particular intelligence-gathering strengths of each species deployed appropriately, he built a picture of the operation that was considerably more detailed than he had expected. The warehouse belonged, through 3 layers of corporate registration, to a company called Nanjing East Spirit Medical Supplies, which was a subsidiary of a larger cultivation pharmaceutical company called Celestial Source Biotech. Celestial Source Biotech was, in the legitimate cultivation world, a significant mid-tier company with a reasonable reputation. Celestial Source Biotech's majority shareholder, according to documents that a rat had found particularly comfortable to nest on in the warehouse's administrative office, was the Zhao clan. Not Zhao Shui's immediate family. A branch of the Zhao clan, the eastern branch, descended from a cousin line, but still legally and culturally part of the same cultivation family. He sat with this information for a long time. Zhao Shui was not involved. He was certain of that, not from his ability, which didn't extend to reading human hearts, but from 3 months of careful observation. She was a rigorous person. She was also genuinely ethical, in the way that the best people and institutions are, not perfectly, not without blind spots, but authentically. She cared about doing things correctly, but telling her meant involving her in something that would damage her family, and that was a choice she had the right to make. He also needed allies for what came next. He told Yunmei first. He told her in the beast habitat, sitting by the wolf enclosure with Gray resting nearby, which was the location she seemed to feel most herself. He told her about the disappearances, the warehouse, and the corporate structure behind it. Yunmei listened without interruption. When he finished, she sat for a moment, then said, "How many beasts are currently in there?" The cats estimate 40 to 60. Varying stages. Some of them are at spirit stage level 1, which is significant. Her expression did something complicated. "We need to get them out." "Yes," he said. "I'm working on how." "Is this why you've been building the animal network here?" "Not just for cultivation practice." "It started as cultivation practice," he said. "And now it's both." She looked at him directly. Yunmei's directness was one of the things that had grown on him steadily since they'd met. It wasn't aggressive or demanding, just honest in the way that people who grew up around animals often were, because animals didn't respond well to anything else. "You've been doing this for months. Planning carefully, learning the network, gathering information. All of it." A pause. "Who are you really, Lin Hao?" It was the most precise version of the question anyone had asked him yet. He thought about how to answer it. "I'm someone who died," he said, "and got a second chance in a body that everyone wrote off. And I decided that if you're going to be underestimated, you should at least use it productively." Yunmei looked at him for a long moment. Then, "Okay," she said. "I'm in. What do you need?" He told her about Zhao Shui next. This conversation was harder to anticipate, and he didn't try. He simply told her the facts, including the corporate lineage, clearly and completely, and then waited. Zhao Shui was quiet for 30 seconds. Her face went through a particular controlled stillness that he had learned to read, the stillness of someone organizing information at speed, not suppressing emotion. "The Eastern Branch," she said finally. "Yes. They have been a source of friction in the family for years. My grandfather does not speak of them. A pause. This would be consistent with behavior I have suspected, but not confirmed. I'm sorry, he said, and meant it. She looked at him sharply, as if assessing whether the apology was performative. Finding it wasn't, she gave a small, precise nod. Don't apologize. This is information. Information is always better than ignorance, however uncomfortable. A beat. What's the plan? Su Ling came into the picture later, and somewhat sideways. She had noticed, with the observational precision that was her particular gift, that Jiang Chen was spending unusual amounts of time in the campus's medical herb storage, checking out supplies that were specifically useful for treating cultivated animals. She had asked him about it, matter-of-factly, over the library table where she worked most evenings. He had considered his options and told her the truth. Su Ling's response, after several seconds of very still, very focused processing, was to say, "Do you know what condition the beasts are being held in?" Variable. Some have been there longer than others. The cats report signs of forced qi extraction, which means at least some of them are being bled for qi without recovery periods. She closed her medical text. That causes meridian damage that's reversible in the early stages and permanent in the later ones. She said it with the flat certainty of someone who has read everything published on the subject. I have a full set of medical supplies and the theoretical knowledge. I've never worked with spirit beasts directly. A pause. I'd like to. I can help with the communication side, he said. I know you can, she said, with a small smile that was the warmest expression he'd seen from her. That's why I'm telling you this. Chapter 18, The Operation. They could not do it alone, and they were smart enough to know it. 4 academy students. 1 at level 2 official cultivation, 1 ice-type cultivator with significant power but no combat experience, 1 beast tamer still in her first year, and 1 pharmacist who had never left the library for anything dangerous, could not conduct a successful raid on a criminal operation run by a branch of one of Nanjing's major cultivation clans. But Jiang Chen had assets that none of the criminals running the warehouse had accounted for. The Crow Network provided him with the patrol schedules for the warehouse's security team, 3 shifts, 6 cultivators per shift, with 2 on external patrol and 4 inside. The patrol pattern had exploitable gaps. The external security system used qi detection arrays that were calibrated for human-level qi affinity signatures, since the designers had assumed any intrusion would be by human cultivators. They were not calibrated for animals. He also, after a great deal of careful communication and some treaty negotiations that he was fairly sure would have been amusing to observe from outside, arranged for assistance from an unexpected source, the Iron Fang Wolf Pack. The pack's alpha, a large, scarred male named Stone Ridge, had received the messages through Gray and had been monitoring the situation for 2 weeks. Stone Ridge was not in Nanjing's legal beast habitat. He was in the wild territory outside the city, where his pack ranged. But the disappearances had included 3 fox families that shared territory with the wolves, and Stone Ridge had his own strong feelings about spirit beasts being harvested. "We will not enter the human buildings," Stone Ridge told him, through a message chain that passed through 4 crows and 2 doves and finally reached him via a pigeon that Old Black had specifically trained for long-distance relay. "But we can create circumstances at the perimeter." The operation itself took 3 hours. It began at 2 a.m. Stone Ridge's pack, 7 wolves, moved into the industrial district along the drainage channels that ran beneath it, using the route that Jiang Chen had mapped with the help of the rats who used those channels as highways. At the appointed time, they positioned themselves at 3 access points to the warehouse block. The security array went active when it detected the pack, but spirit beast qi signatures at stage level 2, which was what the Iron Fang wolves had, flagged in the system as a possible wildlife incursion, not a cultivator attack. The response protocol sent 2 of the internal guards outside to investigate, reducing the interior security to 2. 2 was manageable. Zhao Shui went in through the administrative access with a commercial delivery identity that, in the world of a cultivation pharmaceutical supplier, was entirely plausible and hadn't been challenged in the 47 deliveries that Jiang Chen had documented over the past 3 weeks. She was ice-type. Her chi signature suppressed the arrays in the administrative section. Yunmei went through a ventilation access point that the cats had identified. Not ideal for humans, but manageable for someone athletic and motivated. Su Ling set up her medical station in the loading dock of an adjacent building, which was empty because Dart, the young red-tailed hawk, had confirmed via aerial survey that it had been dark for 6 nights running. Jiang Chen coordinated everything from a position 300 meters away, with scale curled around his wrist as a communication relay. The serpent's sensitivity to vibrations gave him near real-time, situational awareness of the building's interior, and his resonance connections with every animal involved in the operation created a network of information flow that was unlike any communication system the human cultivators inside the warehouse had planned for. He could feel everything. Gray, in the habitat 2 kilometers away, maintaining the resonance thread he'd established with her. The additional chi input gave him clarity when the stress of the operation started to narrow his focus. Dart, circling overhead, feeding him aerial perspective. The cats at the perimeter exits. The wolves at the drainage access. Zhao Shui moving through the administrative section with precise, cold efficiency. Yunmei in the ventilation system, occasionally transmitting brief sensory impressions through the thread he maintained with Copper the lizard, who rode in her jacket pocket. The beasts inside, 43 of them, in varying states. Some frightened, some exhausted, some angry. All of them aware, when he reached out through the resonance field, that something was different, that someone was listening. Hold still, he told them. Help is coming. 43 voices responded. 43 presences, each different, each carrying its own quality of life energy, its own thread of intelligence and feeling. He held all of them in awareness at once, and the resonance core he had been building in his chi field lit up with their combined presence like a constellation forming. This was, he understood in that moment, the real power of the resonance way. Not the information gathering, not the network itself, but this, the ability to hold many beings in true awareness simultaneously, to feel the space between them and the connection that ran through all of them, and to direct that connection into something organized and intentional. The operation succeeded. Not cleanly. Zhao Shui had a tense 7-minute standoff with one of the inside security guards that ended with him frozen in 2 centimeters of spirit ice and a great deal of shouting, which brought the external guards back faster than the timeline had allowed for, and Yunmei had to exit through a rather small window rather than the ventilation access. And 3 of the beasts were too injured to move under their own power and had to be carried, which was a logistical challenge. But 43 beasts were out of the warehouse and moved, via the drainage channels, via the urban green corridors that the Crow Network had mapped, to a temporary sanctuary in the city park that Iron Whisker's network had quietly prepared. Su Ling worked through the rest of the night. She was, under pressure, a different person than the quiet, book-focused woman who walked into walls and hallways. Focused, precise, capable of holding medical complexity in her working memory with an efficiency that made Jiang Chen's coordinating mind feel straightforwardly reassured. She had never worked with spirit beasts directly, but she had read everything, and the theoretical knowledge translated well with him acting as translator between her and the animals she was treating. At 6 a.m., with the operation concluded and themselves successfully not arrested, Jiang Chen sat on a park bench with scale curled on his shoulder and felt something that he hadn't felt in a long time. Not triumph. Something quieter and more real than triumph. The feeling of a system working the way it was supposed to. Connection. Flow. Things going right because the relationships underlying them were genuine. Yunmei sat beside him, leaning back with the physical looseness of someone who has been running on adrenaline for 6 hours and is only now coming down. After a moment, you did it without using combat ability at all. I don't have combat ability, he said. Not the kind that would have helped there. That's not what I mean. She turned to look at him. In the early morning light, with dirt on her jacket and her hair escaping its tie, she looked like someone who has been genuinely alive for the past 6 hours rather than simply existing. You solved a problem that combat ability would have made worse by using something completely different. You built a solution across weeks, from relationships, from trust, from information networks. She shook her head. I have been studying beast taming since I was 8. I have never seen anyone build rapport with animals the way you do. You're not bad at it yourself, he said. I'm good at it, she said matter-of-factly. You're something else. She paused. I think you might actually be the best person I've ever met at this. And I find that. A brief pause, just enough to be noticeable. Very worth knowing. He looked at her, and she held his gaze with the directness that was characteristic of her, and neither of them said anything for a moment that was comfortable in the way that silence between people who have just gone through something difficult together tends to be. Then Scales said, on his shoulder, "She smells happy." And he managed, just barely, to keep from laughing out loud. Chapter 19. Aftermath and Consequences. The documentation Jiang Chen had gathered through the animal network, photos taken through the crow network's remarkable ability to time observations with his phone camera, DART, it turned out, could be trained to press a camera shutter button with his beak, which had taken 2 weeks of patient work and several broken phone screen protectors, but had ultimately been worth it, was presented to the Cultivation Management Bureau's investigation unit through a channel that didn't trace back to him directly. It went through Lin Hao. His older cousin had been, over the past months, an increasingly trusted ally. She worked in legal compliance for Lin Cultivation Pharmaceuticals, which meant she had both the legal knowledge to understand what she was looking at and the corporate connections to route information appropriately. He had cultivated this relationship carefully, meeting her for tea twice a month and being genuinely useful to her in the way that someone with extensive campus intelligence networks could be useful to a corporate compliance officer. She looked at the documentation package he sent her, asked approximately 4 precise questions, and then said, "This is going to be a significant case." "I know," he said. "The Zhao Eastern branch is going to contest everything and try to bury the investigation. They have connections. I know that too." He paused. "But they don't have what I have." What he had was a witness population of 43 spirit beasts, every one of them alive and in improving medical condition, who could, through him, provide testimony about what had happened to them, where they had been kept, and for how long. Spirit beast testimony was a relatively new category in the cultivation legal system, admitted in courts only in the past 12 years and still contentious. But 43 witnesses was not easy to dismiss. Lin Hao filed the report. The investigation opened 3 weeks later. The celestial source connection was confirmed by the Bureau's financial forensics team within a month. The Eastern Zhao branch's cultivation license was suspended while the investigation was ongoing. Zhao Shui knew who had provided the initial information. She had known before he'd told her, because she was Zhao Shui and she had worked it out. She did not thank him in words. Instead, over the following weeks, she began doing something that was, from her, more significant than thanks. She began talking to him about her cultivation. Not casually, not in the distant academic way she discussed theory with most of the cohort, but directly, specifically, showing him what she was working on and asking for his perspective, and then genuinely listening to what he said. This was, from Zhao Shui, the highest form of trust she knew how to offer. He accepted it with the same seriousness she offered it. "The ice affinity," she said one afternoon, when they were in a practice room and she had just demonstrated a formation that was technically perfect and somehow slightly flat. "It's powerful, very clean, very precise." She paused. "But there are moments when I wonder if precision without resonance is limiting." He thought about this. "Ice is about structure," he said. creating order within entropy. Resonance is about connection, which is, in a sense, the opposite. He paused. But they're not incompatible. A network has structure. The structure of a network is what makes it a network rather than just a collection of points. She looked at him with the expression that he had come to associate with a genuinely new idea entering her already crowded conceptual space. Show me. He couldn't show her the resonance way directly. She didn't have the ability to hear animals, and the cultivation path required that foundation. But he could show her the theory. The way connection and structure interacted. The way a well-built network had resilience that a single strong node never had. They worked on this together for 3 weeks, and at the end of those 3 weeks, Zhao Shui performed the same formation she had shown him at the beginning. This time it was not flat. It was precise and alive at once, the ice structure threaded through with something that looked, to his resonance-attuned perception, like genuine flow. She stood in the center of it and looked at him. Better, he said. Significantly better, she agreed. And from Zhao Shui, that was approximately equivalent to a standing ovation. Part 5. Rising. Chapter 20. Foundation. By the end of the first year, Jiang Chen had done what anyone paying close attention to the structure of his cultivation would have predicted from the beginning. He had built something that couldn't be measured by the standard metrics. His official cultivation level, by Academy assessment, Qi gathering stage 3, 1 level above entrance. The improvement was real. He had put genuine effort into the official techniques, both because the practical benefits were not nothing, and because he needed to demonstrate progress for his Academy standing. But it was, compared to what was happening in his resonance cultivation, almost beside the point. His resonance core, as of the 3rd month assessment Old Black had given him the previous week, was solid, stable, the foundation building equivalent of the resonance way. It was not the foundation building that human cultivators achieved. It didn't feel the same. It didn't work the same. But in terms of what it enabled, it was comparable in scope. He maintained stable resonance threads with 57 living beings. 57 individual relationships, each with its own character, each contributing its unique quality to the network. The network as a whole was something more than the sum of its parts, more aware, more capable, more present in the world than any single cultivation base could be. He could, through these connections, sense the entire Academy's campus as a continuous perceptual field. He could direct the network's attention to specific problems with precision. He could access, in real time, the unique capabilities of each connection. Dart's aerial speed, Gray's hunting intelligence, the campus crow's comprehensive information network, Scale's seismic sensitivity, the barn owl's night vision overview, Ancient Shell's ancient deep time perspective. And he was still adding connections. Every week, new threads. The network deepened. Gray went home that spring. The paperwork had taken 8 months, as predicted. Lin Yu had helped navigate the administrative process. Yunmei had provided the beast welfare documentation, and a professor in the Academy's Spirit Beast Research Division had, after a careful conversation with Jiang Chen that involved no false claims and a great deal of honest explanation, agreed to sponsor the repatriation petition. Stone Ridge's pact confirmed their acceptance. The Iron Fang territory was documented as stable and ecologically healthy. The paperwork was approved. He drove with the Academy's wildlife transport team to the release site. Gray rode in the transport compartment with the particular contained stillness of an animal that is working very hard not to show how much she wants to move. At the release site, a clearance at the edge of the mountain forest with Stone Ridge and 3 pack members waiting at the tree line, he opened the transport door. Gray stepped out and looked at him. "Thank you," she said. The simplest form the words could take, and the most complete. "Thank you," he said, "for trusting me." She turned and ran. And as she ran, the thread between them didn't break. It stretched, thinner with distance, but real. A wolf in the mountain forest and a cultivator at the Academy, connected by 8 months of genuine relationship. The thread would fade over years of distance. But right now it hummed with the particular quality of something that had been promised and kept. He sat at the release site for 20 minutes after the transport team had returned to the vehicles. 20 minutes of watching the tree line, feeling the distant thread, thinking about what it meant to do things correctly. Chapter 21, The Gathering Storm. The investigation into celestial source biotech had widened during the spring semester to include connections that none of them had initially identified, financial relationships between the Eastern Zhao branch and a number of cultivation academies in the region, including a junior official in Heaven Reach's administration. This last connection was the one that made the situation dangerous. He learned about it through the barn owls. The barn owls of the clock tower had been, throughout the year, his most valuable institutional intelligence asset. They watched the administrative building around the clock, quite literally, and their comprehensive attention to the building's upper floors, where the senior administration offices were, had produced a continuous stream of useful information. Nothing dramatic. Daily observations. But daily observations, accumulated over 8 months, created a picture. The junior official's name was Administrator Tan. He was responsible for, among other things, student placement decisions and examination protocols. He was also, according to the owl's observations, in regular communication with a contact that arrived via cultivation messaging seal rather than phone or in person, which suggested an attempt to avoid electronic monitoring. The connection to celestial source, when it was uncovered, was specifically through the Harmony assessment results. Administrator Tan had been selectively reporting certain students' scores downward to the main assessment registry. Not flagrantly, by 1 or 2 points, systematically, for students whose family backgrounds suggested they might be interested in the beast relationship programs that competed with Celestial Source's harvesting operation. This had not affected Jiang Chen's own scores. His entrance harmony assessment of 9.7 had been witnessed by the full examination committee and was undeniable. But it had affected others, and the pattern, once identified, was clear and consistent. He brought this to Lin Feng. This was deliberate. He had been thinking about Lin Feng for months, about the trajectory the novel had outlined for his cousin, and about whether that trajectory was fixed or whether, in a world where Lin Hao was a real person with genuine development rather than a background character, the social geometry of the story could shift. Lin Feng, he had concluded, was actually a good person. Not perfectly good. He was 17, privileged, and had spent his entire life being told he was exceptional. He had blind spots. He could be thoughtless in the way that people with abundant natural advantage sometimes are. But he was genuinely curious, genuinely willing to update his beliefs with new information, and genuinely committed to the idea that his cultivation should mean something. He was, in other words, exactly the kind of person who needed to be brought into this. "I need you to understand something," Jiang Chen said, when they were in Lin Feng's dormitory room with the door closed and the privacy array active. "What I'm going to tell you involves your family's reputation and mine, the Academy's administration, and a criminal investigation that is ongoing. And I'm telling you because I need your help, not because I think you're obligated." Lin Feng looked at him steadily. "Tell me." He told him everything. When he finished, Lin Feng was quiet for a long moment. "Then, you've been running this entire investigation yourself. For months. With the animals. With the animals, and with Yun Mei, Zhao Shui, and Su Ling. They know. They do." Another pause. "You came to me now because the connection to the Academy administration makes it something that affects the institution as a whole, and you don't have an institutional pathway that doesn't trace back through me." "Yes," Jiang Chen said. "Your family has a formal relationship with the Academy's board. A concern raised by a Lin family representative about administrative conduct will be taken seriously in a way that a concern raised by a student won't be. You planned for this. I hoped it wouldn't be necessary," Jiang Chen said honestly. "But yes, when I saw the administration connection, I thought, This is where Lin Feng becomes useful. A pause. I'm being frank because I respect you and I don't want to pretend the calculation isn't there. Lin Feng looked at him with an expression that was complicated and real, and something that Jiang Chen thought might be, slowly, the beginning of genuine regard between equals. You are nothing like what I expected from you, he said. Good, Jiang Chen said. Being what was expected would have been a waste. Lin Feng raised the concern through the Lin family's board channel. The investigation into Administrator Ten opened within a week. Chapter 22. The Second-Year Examination. Heavenreach Academy's end-of-year examination was comprehensive. Cultivation Progress Assessment, Technique Demonstration, the group's Spirit Resonance Challenge, and for Excellence Tier students, a panel review of their individual cultivation trajectory. Lin Feng's assessment was, as expected, outstanding. His progress over the year had been exceptional even by the standard of Level 9 Affinity students, and his written cultivation theory work showed a depth and engagement with alternative paths that impressed the panel. One examiner noted that his theoretical work on resonance cultivation, a domain he had clearly been studying independently, was the most original written work submitted by a student in 3 years. Jiang Chen's assessment produced the examiner panel's most unusual meeting of the year. His official cultivation level, Qi Gathering Stage 3, progress of 1 stage over the year. By conventional metrics, this was the academic equivalent of a failing grade for Excellence Tier. His Harmony assessment, 9.8, higher than his entrance score. His Spirit Resonance Challenge score, perfect. The examination committee's rubric literally did not have a descriptor for what they observed. 12 Spirit Beast assessors interacting with a single student simultaneously, with all 12 maintaining voluntary contact for the full examination period. The senior examiner had checked 3 times that the array was functioning correctly. His panel review. He sat before 5 faculty members, the senior examiner, and the Academy's head of Spirit Beast Research, and answered their questions for 90 minutes. They asked him about the resonance way. He told them what he knew, not everything, but enough, framed in the language of theoretical cultivation science rather than personal anecdote. He had written a formal theory document over the winter, 20,000 words of structured argumentation, incorporating the inheritance from the ancient oak site, the practical observations of 8 months of active cultivation, and references to what existing academic literature touched on the subject. They asked him about his network. He was careful here. He described its structure and function in general terms, without exposing every individual animal involved or every piece of intelligence it had gathered. But he was honest about scale. My current stable connections number in the range of 50 to 60. This is, as far as I know, unprecedented for a human cultivator. The theoretical upper limit on resonance network size is not well studied. They asked him, at the end, about his trajectory, where he was going, what he intended. He said, "The resonance way is a lost path that needs to be recovered, not just for my cultivation, for the understanding of how humans and the rest of the living world relate to each other in a world where spirit energy connects everything. That's a long project. It probably takes my whole life. But every year, the foundation deepens, and the ceiling reveals itself more clearly." He paused. "I am not in a hurry. I am building something that doesn't rush." The senior examiner looked at him for a long moment. "Your official cultivation level places you in the bottom third of the excellence cohort. Your resonance metrics place you at the top. This is an administrative problem for us." "I know," Jiang Chen said. "I'm sorry if that's difficult." "It is fascinating," the senior examiner said, and Jiang Chen thought the man sounded approximately 30 years younger than he had before the review began. "It is the most fascinating assessment problem I have encountered in 20 years. We are going to need to create new rubrics." A pause. "Continue what you're doing. Don't let us slow you down." He was advanced to Excellence Tier Senior, a designation that had not previously existed. The Academy's research division filed a proposal for a formal resonance cultivation study program. The proposal named him as the primary subject. He thought Ancient Shell would appreciate that. Chapter 23, The Year's End. On the last evening before the summer break, the four of them, Yunmei, Zhao Shui, Su Ling, and Lin Hao, gathered at Jiang Chen's invitation in the beast habitat, where Dart sat on a convenient branch, and Scale had coiled herself around a warm stone and was observing proceedings with the intense, unblinking attention of a serpent who considers herself the most important intelligence in any room she occupies. Su Ling had brought food. This was characteristic of her. She remembered to eat much more reliably when she was feeding other people as well as herself, and she had over the year developed the habit of bringing more than she needed to wherever she went, which meant her presence was reliably associated with excellent snacks. They ate and talked, and as the evening settled into the warm, comfortable looseness that end-of-year evenings tend toward, Jiang Chen listened to the people around him and thought about the year. He had entered Heavenreach Academy as a character who wasn't supposed to be there, a background figure given a brief walk-on role before disappearing from someone else's story. He was leaving the first year as something else, the center of a network that extended from this campus into the city, into the mountains, into the legal and administrative systems of the cultivation world. A cultivator at the beginning of a path that had been lost for 400 years. A person who had made, genuinely, the kinds of friends that last. Yunmei was talking about the spirit beasts they'd released from the warehouse. She had been working with Su Ling over the past 2 months on a formal rehabilitation protocol for seized spirit beasts, in collaboration with the Cultivation Management Bureau's Wildlife Division. It was promising. It was also, she said, going to be a major focus of her second year. Su Ling was listening to this with the focused interest she gave to everything that mattered to her, occasionally asking precise questions about pharmacological aspects of the rehabilitation process that made Yunmei pull out her notebook. Zhao Shui was sitting slightly apart from the others, in the way she often positioned herself, near enough to be present, far enough to maintain a sense of her own independence, and watching the interaction between the other two women with the expression she wore when she was observing something she found genuinely interesting but hadn't fully categorized yet. Lin Hao was the most changed of all of them, Jiang Chen thought. The boy who had walked into Heavenreach with the casual certainty of someone who had never had reason to doubt his own centrality to events had, over the course of the year, developed the particular quality of attention that comes from encountering complexity and taking it seriously. He was still exceptional. He was also, now, aware that exceptional had more than one definition. Next year, Yunmei said, turning to Jiang Chen, the rehabilitation protocol needs a reliable communication component. Someone who can talk to the beasts being treated and explain what's happening to them. She gave him a look that was cheerful and unsubtle in equal measure. I assume you're available. I'll check my schedule, he said. Your schedule, she said, is approximately 400 animal relationships and whatever homework the academy assigns. I think we can find a slot. The schedule is more like 60, he said. The 400 would be later years. Oh, we're planning that far ahead, Zhao Shui said. Her tone was precise and could have been read either way. He chose to read it the warm way, because he was pretty sure that was the right reading. I plan ahead, he said. It's how I operate. It is, Su Ling agreed. She had a small smile that she didn't deploy often, but when she did, it landed with quiet precision. He is the most methodically deliberate person I have ever met. I find it. She paused, in the particular way she paused when choosing words with care, very restful. Restful, Jiang Chen repeated. You never do things chaotically, she said. You build systems. You trust the systems. When things go wrong, you adjust the system and continue. It is genuinely very calming to be around. He looked at the four people around him in the warm evening of the beast habitat and thought, this is what he had been building. Not a cultivation base, in the end, or not only that, a network of human connection as real and as deep as the one he maintained with the animals. A web of people who knew him genuinely and whom he knew genuinely, and who had chosen, with full information, to be here. The sparrows in the habitat tree above them were arguing about nesting sites in the particular rapid, opinionated way of sparrows. Dart was watching the argument with the mild interest of a bird who found sparrow disputes entertaining but not concerning. Scale had fallen asleep on her warm stone. "You are sitting in the middle of your network," Old Black said, arriving silently in the tree above and regarding the scene below with his single clear eye. His communication was quiet, meant only for Jiang Chen. "Can you feel it?" He could. The threads, to every animal in the habitat, to the campus around him, to the wider city, to Gray in her mountain forest, to the crows in his family's estate, to Ancient Shell in the garden. And now, also, new threads, fragile still, different in quality from the animal ones but real, to the four people sitting with him in the evening light. Different kind of resonance. Same fundamental principle. "You are beginning to understand," Old Black said. "This is what the resonance way is, fully practiced. Not the ability to speak with animals. The ability to hold the world in genuine relationship." A pause. The ancient masters called it being woven into the living cloth of the world. Jiang Chen looked up at the old crow in the cedar tree, with his one clear eye and his 40 years of watching, and felt something move in his chest that was older and quieter and more real than ambition. "Thank you," he said quietly, so only Old Black could hear. "Don't thank me yet," Old Black said. "You have barely begun." And in his voice was everything that ever made crows sound like laughter. "But yes, you are doing well." Part 6. The Path Ahead. Chapter 24. Second year begins. Summer brought changes. The investigation into Celestial Source Biotech concluded with charges filed against 7 members of the Eastern Zhao branch, including 2 who held cultivation licenses. The legal process would take another year at minimum, but the operation was shut down and the cultivation license suspension was made permanent for the principals involved. The Cultivation Management Bureau, in their internal review of how the case had come to light, noted that the initial documentation had come from an anonymous wildlife monitoring source, and that the quality of information, timing, visual evidence, corroborating documentation was unusually high. They assigned 2 investigators to review the Bureau's own internal communications for the compromise that the source clearly suspected. This review found 3 Bureau employees with compromised records and a data management system that had been selectively reporting to an external party for 18 months. Jiang Chen followed these developments through his network with the quiet satisfaction of someone watching a system function correctly. He spent the summer at the estate. The compound had changed in his perception from when he had first awakened there. He had networks now, deep and established, and the estate felt inhabited in a way it had not before. Little Pip's family had grown by 12 birds. The raccoon dogs under the West storage had expanded their network of tunnels, which they explained at considerable length whenever he asked. Old Black Cedar was older and more patient than ever, and the old crow met him there every morning with the same unhurried willingness to discuss the deep structure of the world. He also spent significant time with his human family, Lin Hao, with whom he had built a genuine relationship of mutual respect and utility. The Lin family patriarch, his great-uncle, who had watched his development from cautious distance and now requested a formal cultivation conversation that went on for 4 hours and ended with the old man saying nothing specific but looking at Jiang Chen with an expression that was clearly a thorough revision of a long-held opinion. And Lin Feng, who came home from an external training camp in the 4th week of summer and immediately sought him out. They spent the summer in a cultivation partnership that was, he thought, unlikely to have been written into the original novel at any chapter. Lin Feng's qi cultivation and his resonance cultivation were profoundly different systems, but the theoretical intersection Zhao Shui had first identified, structure, and connection, the complementary nature of formation-based power and network-based awareness turned out to be genuinely productive for both of them. Lin Feng's cultivation advanced rapidly with the added resonance theory dimension. His Jiang Chen's official qi cultivation made modest but real progress as his meridians, expanded by resonance qi, became better at holding standard cultivation energy as well. More importantly, Lin Feng became someone he genuinely considered a friend. In the novel, Jiang Chen said one evening, carefully, not too much detail, but enough. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if the brilliant character and the forgotten one had actually talked to each other. Lin Feng looked at him sideways. He had learned, over the year, that Jiang Chen occasionally said things with a specifically layered quality that invited careful listening. What novel? One I read once. A long time ago. He paused. It had a genius main character who was surrounded by interesting people he never quite paid attention to. That sounds wasteful, Lin Feng said. It was, Jiang Chen agreed. He had everything he needed to be genuinely great. If only he'd looked around. A pause. But that's the thing about stories. The interesting people are always there. The question is whether the protagonist is paying attention. Lin Feng was quiet for a moment. Then, you're not talking about a novel. I'm talking about a novel, Jiang Chen said. I'm also talking about us. A longer silence. Then Lin Feng said, I know that I am, the kind of person who assumed the story was mine, that I was the center of it. He said it with the particular discomfort of someone being honest about something they've worked hard to see clearly. I've been thinking about that a lot this year. And I think the most interesting stories are actually about everyone, Lin Feng said. Not one person, the network of everyone. Jiang Chen smiled. Now you're thinking like a resonance cultivator. Maybe, Lin Feng said. Then, with the somewhat abashed humor that he'd developed over the year. Should I be worried about that? Absolutely not, Jiang Chen said. It suits you. Chapter 25, The Network Grows. Second year at Heavenreach brought the changes that first year had prepared. The formal resonance cultivation study program launched in the first month of the semester. It was housed in the Spirit Beast Research Division, under the senior examiner who had assessed him the previous year, and it involved a formal curriculum that Jiang Chen had largely written himself. The first curriculum in 400 years built around the Resonance Way's theoretical framework. He taught it. Not alone. There were faculty members involved, and the program was officially under institutional oversight. But the core content was his, and the students in the first cohort were 12 carefully selected individuals who showed some degree of natural resonance affinity, even if none of them had anything approaching his inherent ability. This was new. He had never expected to be teaching. He was good at it. Teaching required the same quality of attention that cultivation did: genuine, sustained interest in the person being taught, awareness of where they were and what they needed, adjustment based on what he observed. He brought to the classroom the same habits he had built in the beast habitat: waiting, listening, responding to what was actually happening rather than to what he expected to happen. Yuan Mei was the most advanced student in the program. She didn't have the inherent listener ability. Animal communication remained his unique trait, but she had beast taming's deep foundation in resonance principles, and the theoretical framework he provided gave her beast taming practice a depth of understanding that was already showing in her field work. Su Ling was not formally enrolled but attended every session, taking notes with the systematic thoroughness she applied to everything. She explained, documenting the theoretical framework for a research paper on the intersection of resonance cultivation and spirit beast medical treatment. The research paper was already, by the second month of the semester, very long. Zhao Shui attended occasionally, always taking the last seat, always listening more than speaking, and always, when she did speak, saying exactly one thing that reframed the discussion in a way that everyone, including Jiang Chen, found productive. He had begun to think that Zhao Shui's cultivation philosophy and his were, at base, describing the same thing from different angles, and that at some theoretical ceiling they probably arrived at the same point. In the city, the network extended. The Cultivation Management Bureau's Wildlife Division had formalized a working relationship with the rehabilitation program Yun Mei and Su Ling had developed. Several of the beasts recovered from the Celestial Source operation had, after recovery, chosen to remain in Nanjing rather than return to wild territories, partly from preference, partly because some of them had developed attachments to the humans who had treated them. These beasts became the foundation of what the Bureau was beginning to call, in internal documents, Urban Spirit Beast Welfare Monitoring, a system that Jiang Chen recognized, with private amusement, as the formal institutionalization of what his Crow network had been doing informally for over a year. He contributed to this formalization, carefully, anonymously where possible, through channels that preserved his network's independence. He was building infrastructure, not empire. Old Black visited monthly and was, he thought, quietly pleased. "You are not rushing," the old crow observed. "This is good. I am being strategic," Jiang Chen said. "Those are the same thing. At this level," Old Black said. "The ones who rush burn. The ones who wait build." He tilted his head. "Also, the barn owls say the administration has formally defined your cultivation as foundation building stage equivalent. The paperwork was very contentious apparently. I know. I had to write 16 pages of theoretical justification for why resonance core formation is structurally equivalent to foundation building for purposes of academic standing. Was it accurate? Mostly. There are some differences I simplified. Simplification is acceptable when the audience is not ready for complexity, Old Black said, with the philosophical generosity of a crow who has watched humans from trees for 40 years. They will catch up eventually. They will, he agreed. Give it a generation. Chapter 26. What Remains. On the anniversary of his awakening in Lin Hao's body, Jiang Chen sat under Old Black cedar tree in the Lin estate compound and counted what he had. 1 year and a half of life in this world. 63 stable resonance threads, the strongest of which were the relationships that had been growing the longest. Little Pip, bright and proud, and still conducting her quality control surveys across the academy. Dart, who had grown into his young hawk confidence and was currently the most reliable aerial scout in the city's informal network. Scale, who had moved from under the dormitory radiator to a custom-built enclosure in his study space that she designed herself, giving him a 7-point requirements list via Qi communication that he had honored completely. The campus sparrow network, the barn owls and their clock tower, Iron Whiskers, semi-retired from active intelligence work, but still available for consultation, his various successor cats maintaining the network he had built. Gray, in her mountain forest, the thread thin with distance but still present. She had, in the spring, given birth to her first litter. He had felt this as a distant warmth in the resonance connection, the kind of event that matters to networks. Ancient Shell, in the academy garden, as patient and as deep as ever. Old Black, in the cedar above him, watching the estate with one clear eye. And the humans. Yun Mei, who was currently in the beast habitat running a rehabilitation session with a family of golden pheasants that the Bureau had brought in from an illegal bird market, and who had told him last week, in the direct way she told him most things, that she intended to dedicate her cultivation career to the intersection of beast taming and resonance theory, and that she assumed this meant they would be working together for a long time, and that she was happy about that. Su Ling, who had submitted her research paper on resonance cultivation and spirit beast medicine to the Cultivation Medical Journal and had received, in response, a request for an expanded monograph that had sent her into the particular elevated state she entered when given a significant research project, in which she forgot to eat even more than usual and required periodic reminders from both Jiang Chen and a specific campus sparrow whom he had tasked with this duty. Zhao Shui, who had, 3 weeks ago, In the practice room after a session that had gone 3 hours past its scheduled end, looked at him with the focused intensity she brought to everything and said, I have been considering the intersection of ice cultivation and resonance theory. I think the most productive way to continue this research would be as partners, formal cultivation partners. If you are interested. The statement had been perfectly composed. Her posture was perfectly composed. The slight additional precision in her diction, recognizable to anyone who knew her, was the only indication that the ask had cost her something. He had said yes immediately and watched something in her face settle. Lin Hao, who had left for a training expedition in the Western cultivation territories and sent reports back through the cultivation message relay every 2 weeks. The reports had evolved from formal cultivation updates to something more like letters, which was probably the truest measure of how much the year had changed things. Lin Yu, at the estate, who had recently been promoted to head of compliance for Lin Cultivation Pharmaceuticals, and had told him that the job was more interesting than she'd expected because she said, gradually developing the habit of listening to the whole system rather than just the obvious parts. He had not told her this was resonance cultivation in human social form, but he thought it. He looked up at Old Black in the cedar tree, with the late afternoon light moving through the leaves and the distant sounds of the city threading through the estate's walls. I think, he said, that I am where I'm supposed to be. That is a dangerous thing to believe, Old Black said. I know. I mean it in the sense of, this is the right path, not in the sense of, I'm finished. Then yes, Old Black said. You are where you are supposed to be. A pause. It is a good answer for 1.5 years. Another pause, longer. The original boy, the one who was here before you. He would not have been. He was afraid, always. Fear makes bad roots. I know. You are not afraid. I am sometimes, Jiang Chen said. Just not of the things that used to matter. The crow was quiet for a moment, in the way that Old Black was quiet when he was actually considering something rather than simply organizing thoughts before speaking. Then, what are you afraid of? He thought about it. Forgetting the small things, he said finally. Getting powerful enough that the things that don't look impressive start to look unimportant. The way big things crowd out small things if you're not careful. He looked up at the crow. You asked me, when we first met, not to forget the small voices when I became powerful. That's what I'm afraid of. Becoming the kind of person who would. Old Black was quiet for a very long time. Then, you will not become that person, the old crow said, because you are afraid of it. His filmed eye caught the fading light. The ones who forget are the ones who are not afraid to forget. You will be different. A pause that held the specific weight of a belief arrived at through 40 years of watching. I am certain. Jiang Chen leaned back against the cedar's roots and let the evenings settle around him. The sparrows in the eaves were coming home for the night, their chatter bright and purposeful. Somewhere in the estate, a door closed, and the sound carried through the warm air with the particular quality of sounds in places that have become familiar. He was a dead man who had been given a second life in someone else's story, in someone else's world, as someone else's footnote. He had a web of 63 genuine relationships and a path that had been lost for 400 years and a set of problems interesting enough to occupy him for decades, and a small serpent with an elaborate enclosure and very specific opinions about room temperature. He had, in other words, exactly enough. And it was only the beginning. Epilogue, the long thread. 3 years later, the Resonance Cultivation Institute at Heavenreach Academy was formally recognized as an independent research body by the National Cultivation Science Council, the first new recognized cultivation science in 60 years. The founding document cited the recovery of the theoretical framework by a researcher named Lin Hao, currently in his 4th year at Heavenreach, and noted that the empirical validation of the framework through a practitioner network of over 200 resonance threads represented the largest documented cultivation research dataset in the field's history. The same year, the Bureau of Cultivation Management established the Urban Spirit Ecology Division, in partnership with the Heavenreach Beast Welfare Program. The division's first director was Yun Mei, who had graduated 2 years early and built a clinical practice that combined beast taming, resonance theory, and a pharmaceutical protocol developed collaboratively with Su Ling, now the youngest published author in the Cultivation medical journal's history. The division's informal communications relied heavily on a distributed animal observation network that was, technically, not part of the official organizational structure, but which the division's director described in internal documents as the most reliable real-time ecological monitoring system in the city. Zhao Shui, by the end of her 4th year, had achieved a cultivation level in ice-type Qi that placed her in the top 3% of her generation nationally, and had produced a theoretical framework paper on structure-resonance duality that was cited in 47 subsequent publications before she'd finished revising the second draft. Her cultivation partner, formally registered with the Academy's Cultivation Partnership Office, was listed as Lin Hao. The office had required 3 forms of additional documentation because the pairing of a top 3% Qi cultivator with a student whose official Qi stage was still mid-foundation had no established precedent. Su Ling, who had drafted much of the supporting documentation, had described the cultivation compatibility analysis in terms that were technically accurate and significantly understated. Lin Feng had returned from the Western Territories with a cultivation base that was everything the original novel had promised and something more, a mind that had been genuinely opened by the experience of seeing his brilliant genius situated within a complex world that did not organize itself around him. He was, as the novel had predicted, rising rapidly toward the upper echelons of his generation. He was also, as the novel had not predicted, someone who sought out his cousin's counsel regularly and listened when it was given, and who had told him once, during one of those conversations, that the year he'd spent at the academy with someone who saw the world differently than he did had been worth more to his actual cultivation than any training camp he had attended. Lin Hao, Jiang Chen, who had learned to wear both names comfortably, as parts of the same person, sat in the Institute's main research hall and thought about the novel that had once contained him as a footnote. 847 chapters of someone else's story, read in a world that no longer existed, by a person who had crossed from one world into another and found, on arrival, that the footnote had a much longer story in it than the author had imagined. He thought about Jiang Chen, who had died reading on a phone while crossing a street, and about Lin Hao, who had died in fever, leaving a body that the universe had decided to repurpose. He thought about Old Black waiting 40 years in a cedar tree, an ancient shell waiting 60 years in a garden, and an eagle in a forest who had maintained a cultivation site for 400 years on the promise that someone would come. He thought about Scale, who was currently in her enclosure in the Institute's study space. Curled in the precise corner she had determined through weeks of deliberate experimentation produced the optimal combination of warmth and visibility of the door. She had been asleep when he left, but would be awake when he returned, watching him with the complete attention that she had offered since the moment he had crouched beside her behind the Academy's groundskeeping shed and asked if he could help. He thought about little Pip, who had found him on his first morning in this world, and said, "Can you hear me?" He thought about the answer he had given, and the answer that question had grown into, over 4 years, in a world that answered back. 63 threads at that first assessment. Now the count was 187 and growing. Each one a relationship. Each one a voice in the living cloth of the world. Each one an angle, a perspective, a contribution to the extraordinary, distributed, patient, profound thing he was building thread by thread through the accumulated texture of genuine connection. He was not finished. He had barely started, by the measure of where the resonance way ultimately led, and he knew it. And he found this not discouraging, but exactly the opposite. A path long enough to be worth walking, stretching out before him into distances he could not yet see. He picked up his pen and returned to work. Somewhere on the building's roof, a sparrow sang. He listened,